Hi, I'm Radical Liberation coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri in these United States. And is this the last week I'll say this? Anyway, I'm not sure, but self-declared king of the moon. I have with me Lambda.
Good evening.
See his excellent channel, Lambda's Bible Studies, in the description of the show. And we have Academic Agent.
Hello. Have you ever had to defend those property rights on the moon?
We'll see. I need to line up my supporters, which, in fact, let's go right to that. I had a very nice supporter bug me because on Subscribestar, I've only had a $5 tier, $5 per month tier. And he actually wanted to help more than that. Like the system wouldn't let him help as much as he wanted, you know. So at his prompting, I've added some higher tiers, and they have marvelously creative names: $10 tier, $15 tier, and so forth. Anyway, so I just put that in there just so I could support him supporting us. But he made a really interesting suggestion, which is that I play off the moon theme. And, each level would have, eventually you're up to like Duke of the Moon or something like that, right? But, you could be, I think there's certain craters on the moon. You could be the whatever crater level and so forth.
I don't know if there's any biblical basis for this, but on one of my Deepest Law streams recently, we were doing the art of revelation. And Mary was very often depicted basically surfing on the moon in revelatory art, kind of like a little crescent moon surfboard that she had. So,
There's something in Islam about Mary going to the moon.
I didn't hear that.
Nah.
Those Middle Ages. We also have Mad Mercenary coming in from stormy Australia, right, Mad Merc?
Correct. Apologies for being late, gentlemen. There is currently a storm happening over my house, and as everyone knows, Australian internet is not the best, so I have a few issues. I'm also operating off of about 2 hours of sleep because I have a graveyard shift at work. So.
Right. Now, I understand that the internet in Australia is not privately provided. Is that correct?
There are aspects of it that are private. So you have providers that are private, but the wires and the fiber optic cable itself is public. And that has been the big issue because some areas don't have good internet because the government can't get internet access out to everyone, or they're diverting it from some areas that are high need to areas that are low need to try and make it more equitable. And it's just been a whole mess of an issue that's cost billions of dollars.
Equity in internet provision. Yes. Something I don't know if you would have heard our last show, but something that I found quite interesting that I stumbled on in looking at the Fed announcement is that the Fed now takes into account equity, the diversity, equity. The other one? What's the I one?
Inclusion.
Inclusion. Yeah. Equity is now all over their mission statement. And they are literally, according to them, they are making decisions based on equity as part of what they're factoring in making decisions at the Federal Reserve. Imagine that.
I bet you even the central controllers of the USSR didn't actually have that as a mission statement.
Yeah, right. I know. They're taking it to whole new levels. Okay, so let's see here. I do want to share. I didn't share a screen, and I would like to. Okay, so let me share a screen. I'm not going to put the words up, but I would like to put the book up and also share this link with you all. Stefan Kinsella, someone I've known for years through the Mises Institute, is interesting fellow. He's actually a patent attorney. That is his day job and has been for a long time. And he's, in my view, one of the key people on the intellectual property topic. Namely, he's pretty much against it, as you can tell from the title of the book. having said that, I don't want to bias things too much with his evaluation just yet, but I did want to borrow from him in a section of the book called Summary of IP Law. And here he's being very careful not to be in libertarian mode. He's literally in attorney mode, and he's just telling us what this stuff is, legally speaking. All right. So reading from Kinsella's Against Intellectual Property, in the first part of this series, which was the cigar stream from last Friday on Academic Agents channel, I believe, yeah, I think I put that link in the show description if you missed that. We were talking about patents, and I just wanted to read his description just to ground us in the proper definition of that. And then we're going to turn to copyright for a good chunk of this stream. So he says a patent is a property right in inventions, that is, in devices or processes that perform a, quote, useful function. A new or improved mousetrap is an example of a type of device which may be patented. A patent effectively grants the inventor a limited monopoly on the manufacture, use, or sale of the invention. However, a patent actually only grants to the patentee the right to exclude, that is, to prevent others from practicing the patented invention. It does not actually grant to the patentee the right to use the patented invention. Now, I don't think he's going to explain here why that's significant. Oh, yeah, in the footnote, he explains that, and we kind of went over that, Lambda. This is this whole issue of cross-licensing, where you have a patent, but you might not be able to use it because to actually use it, you'd hit somebody else's patent, right? And we got into that, the whole cross-licensing thing. Not every innovation or discovery is patentable. The U.S. Supreme Court has, for example, identified 3 categories of subject matter that are unpatentable, namely 1, laws of nature, 2, natural phenomena, and 3, abstract ideas. Reducing abstract ideas to some type of practical application, that is, a useful, concrete, and tangible result, is patentable, however. U.S. patents since June 8th, 1995 last from the date of issuance until 20 years from the original filing date of the patent application. The previous term had been 17 years. Now, one more thing on that. I noticed right at the end of talking about trademark, he's talking about how many laymen, including libertarians, have a poor understanding of IP concepts and law and often confuse copyrights, trademarks, and patents. For example, he says, it is widely and incorrectly believed that in the U.S. system, the inventor who files first at the patent office has priority over those who file later. However, the U.S. system is actually a first-to-invent system, unlike most other countries, which do have a first-to-file system for priority. Anyway, I thought that was all good, concrete clarification. I don't know that we particularly had said that the U.S. was a first-to-file. If anyone said it, it would have been me, because I had that wrong idea in my head.
I don't know. I suspect if we were cross-examined by a lawyer, then we've been found to be wrong on all kinds of things in the last stream. But to my lay ears, nothing he said there invalidates the broad conclusions that we were drawing.
Right.
And if you really were cross-examined by a lawyer, by the way, Lambda, they tend to limit you to closed questions. Yes, no, yes, no. That's how they trap you, you know. So you are.
And never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to. Yeah, is the cross-examination.
So, AA in the court, are you able to say, "I object"? That's a Kafka trap.
I don't know. They make it difficult because if someone asks you a closed question and then you start waffling, it comes off politician-like and weaselly. So it's best to say yes or no most of the time.
Right. Yeah. Even if there is no reasonable way to give them a yes or no and be truthful and accurate. Right?
Exactly. Well, you've got to watch these lawyers. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So that's just a little bit of on patent, which we did a whole stream on already. So now let's turn to copyright. And again, let's start with Kinsella. He has 2 short paragraphs to define what copyright is. Copyright is a right given to authors of original works, such as books, articles, movies, and computer programs. Copyright gives the exclusive right to reproduce the work, prepare derivative works, or to perform or present the work publicly, which of course gives me the funny idea, Lambda, of what it would be like to present a computer program publicly. But anyway, the imagination goes wild. Anyway.
The spoken word poetry, yeah.
Interpretive dance is actually what came to mind for me. But anyway, okay. Copyrights protect only the form or expression of ideas, not the underlying ideas themselves. So I think the point there is once Academic Agent produces his masterpiece of reactionary political theory, we would not, if he copyrights it, we would not be able to just make a copy of that book, publish it, make money off it. But we could propound the ideas in it using our own words. We could go forth and spread the good gospel of reactionaryism or whatever.
Absolutely correct. Right? That's how it should be. That's how it should be. Shouldn't it? No.
Okay, let's see. Let me just see if this footnote is interesting. Oh, okay. Modern copyright law has superseded and largely preempted common law copyright, which attached automatically from the moment of a work's creation, and which essentially conferred only a right of first publication. Okay, so he says, never mind that. Now things work a bit differently. While a copyright may be registered to obtain legal advantages, a copyright need not be registered to exist. Rather, a copyright comes into existence automatically the moment the work is fixed in a tangible medium of expression, and it lasts for the life of the author plus 70 years, or for a total of 95 years in cases in which the employer owns the copyright. All right, so unless there's any comments on that definition of copyright, let's have... Oh, I'm sorry. We had a video. Let's do the video. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
You need to share my screen.
Can I add it?
Yeah, there we go.
You're not on the right video.
But this is a bubble sort as a Hungarian dance. So
I have played that to my coworkers. Yes, you're right.
All right. Here's the video. So...
Stealing a thing leaves one less left. Copying it makes one thing more. That's what copying's for. Copying is not theft. If I copy yours, you have it too. One for me and one for you. That's what copies can do. If I steal your bicycle, you have to take the bus. But if I just copy it, there's one for each of us. Making more of a thing. That is what we call copying. Sharing ideas with everyone. That's why copying is fun.
Thank you. So that's from Nina Paley, who's an animator and has done some interesting animation movies and shorts and so forth. She has one on the Middle East Academic Agent, with which, if you haven't seen it, is really worth your time.
I hate to be contentious from the very get-go, but is Nick Phelps a Chinese agent?
I don't know what that means.
To believe this.
And so
right out the gate with those spicy opinions, AA.
So Nina Paley not only is an animator, but she didn't just do the animation for this. This is really her position. She really dug into this intellectual property issue and decided that she rejected intellectual property and so forth. So I believe all her animated works on YouTube, and I'm betting on it for this stream, you are free to play them on your stream, distribute them yourselves, and so on and so forth. You know, I don't know exactly which licensing. Lambda, I am getting an echo, maybe because of change around of something. Yeah,
I'd love it if you got hit with copyright for playing that, Radley. Love it.
I think it's possible. There's cases where people have had their own content be copy struck because it's been broadcast on, another country's terrestrial TV station, and they're big enough to get in the content ID system.
Right. Worth mentioning in terms of the world of YouTube. Don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much because I've noticed that it's very easy for YouTube creators to talk about what's extremely interesting to them. That is true. Creating on YouTube and bore the audience who aren't YouTube creators. Having said that, worth mentioning that all this copyright business has hit Academic Agent this very day.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. Bob Dylan's. I mean, I did know this going in, that Bob Dylan's record label has always been insane. Like they don't allow anything, actually to his detriment. In my view, I think it's a barrier to younger fans getting into him because they just don't allow anything on there at all. Like so, yeah, I've currently disputed that, and if the stream magically comes back in the next day or so, you'll know that the record label were like, yeah, okay, fair enough. If it stays gone forever, they uphold it. And as I was actually talking to you before the stream, Radlib, the way it works on YouTube is that all of the power is with the copyright holder. It's essentially just up to them. There's no way to dispute it if they, they make the decision at the end of the day. So yeah.
Right. There's no arbitration or negotiation. Well, I assume if you're big enough, there's negotiation. You go to the rights holder and you say, "Hey, I really want to use this in my movie or whatever," and you pay them.
No. If you're big enough, there's a lawsuit, I'm sure. If you're like, if you were like, I don't know, I'm Steven Spielberg. I'm just going to use a Bob Dylan song in my film. He'd get sued without doubt.
Right. Well, he'd make arrangements.
Or they try to come to an arrangement. So, but hold on though, Radley. I don't want to hijack too much, but can I just say up front that I disagree with the song? I just want to say that. Out of the four of us, I think I'm the most likely to disagree with the sentiments of the song.
Yep. No, I understand, but let's hold that. And Lambda, why don't you walk us through? In fact, we're ready to do that, right? Let's walk us through Lambda's presentation, and then I think that'll naturally lead us into that conversation. All right.
Yeah, I'm excited to have somebody on stream this time who disagrees, because it's sort of a bit boring when everyone's just singing off the same song sheet. So yes, copyright. I think that there are more people who agree with us in general on patents than copyright. But I have the radical position that I also think the world would be better to just scrap copyright altogether, which would obviously leave published authors a little bit out of luck. But yes, so quick reminder: why are we talking about these three things in the same category? Probably ultimately comes back to this bit of the Constitution that lumped them all together as intellectual property, and then talked about the different things. We did patents last week, copyright, and we might briefly touch on trademarks today. But yes, the claim is to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited time to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. And I guess my basic contention is that copyright actually holds science and the useful arts back. I actually wanted to address, last week, we had a few people in the comments saying that we spent the whole time destroying patents as they currently were and failed to set up a new system in its place. Well, I'm not in a position to set up a new system, but I think no copyright and no patents would be clearly better than the current existing system. Not necessarily the best outcome, but that's my stance.
Would you agree though that is your stance, Lambda, that patents and copyrights are very different areas, and that you could actually be against one and for the other one, as I am. I'm against patents, but I'm for copyright for reasons.
Yeah, I don't think there's an inherent contradiction in having a pro-patent and anti-copyright, or a pro-copyright and anti-patent stance.
Right.
Okay, so I thought I'd structure it similarly to how I did last time, through a series of myths, because I think this is a useful way to start coming into a topic. This is what you probably think. If you haven't thought about this topic very much, this is probably the impression that you have. So I think the key one is incentive. Most people think of copyright as an incentive. Like, if it wasn't for the copyright system, we wouldn't have all this amazing creativity going on. People wouldn't be writing books, painting paintings, publishing games. It's all enabled through copyright. And I think that's just completely wrong. People would continue to create regardless of whether there's a copyright system. I actually think creative people will create against all odds. Their creativity is just like, it doesn't need incentivizing, it needs holding back.
Yeah, it's an innate characteristic of their being. It is not incentivized by monetary means. It's a part of them. It's just like it's part of humanity.
Exactly. So probably then I think maybe a lot of people would actually agree with me on that, but then would come back and say, yes, but they might like to create, but they won't be able to because they won't have money. And if they don't have money, they won't be able to live. So I guess my contention is that in a free market system where there are a small number of people who have the ability to provide a service that lots of other people want, there will be a way made to enable the transaction that everybody wants to happen.
I want to come at this from a slightly different angle, Lambda. So I think at least for me, when we talk about the incentive argument, I'm thinking of the the starving artist, right? The writer or the painter or something like that. Let's have compassion on them, because if we don't, then we won't have beautiful things anymore. We won't have novels and stories and paintings and so forth, right? And sculptures. But academic agent, if he could remove himself a little bit emotionally from the topic, and think about it from a different angle. Wait. Think about it from a different angle. Let's talk just for a moment about the overproduction of intellectuals, AA. Right. Yeah. Now we see this quite clearly when we look at the university system, where we've had such hits as Pol Pot coming out of the French universities and his band, his merry band, right? We've had no end of trouble, actually. If you go through and look at unrest in the third world and so on and so forth, you get people who are educated as if they are going to now like join the ruling elite, but they don't get to for various reasons. Maybe there's just an overproduction of them. Maybe they just lose out and a different elite gets in power or something, right? But these intellectuals that we are kind of overproducing right now with our mad rush to get as many people in university as possible have been a huge source of trouble, right, AA? Mm-hmm. It's fair to say. And so I wonder if we might think about the fact, we generally come at this from the angle of, well, we're not going to be incentivizing it enough. Well, what about incentivizing it too much? Because from my point of view, I've seen plenty of art that's getting chunked out that maybe we do better without.
My objection has not actually been raised yet, Lambda.
Okay.
Which is, I would frame it in terms of just remuneration. Okay, just remuneration. Let's just pick somebody who none of us really care about, or I imagine none of us care about watching this. Adele, right? Highly in demand singer, millions of fans around the world, probably very wealthy because of that, right? Why should somebody who isn't Adele and who has not been subcontracted by her to work as a marketer or to work on her team selling her products or whatever be remunerated for a product that they did not make? In the little cartoon, I didn't really see the distinction between the bicycle and the Adele album, because to me the Adele album is much like the single bicycle. It's not really for somebody else to come along and just copy it and distribute Adele albums to everybody. That's not fair, is it? They've essentially just stolen it. And I just don't understand why people who believe in capitalism all of a sudden become like, quasi-communists over this issue. Why should Adele have her stuff given away for free, whereas the bicycle manufacturer should be remunerated for selling the bicycle? That's my.
I think here's what Stefan Kinsella taught me reading his book and listening to him talk about it, that really brought things home for me, and that is scarcity. The property rights are not just random things that we do for fairness. Okay, I wouldn't accept the fairness argument. It's something we do to reduce conflict. Hoppe is big on thinking about property in this way as well. The problem with not having a property right in my actual bicycle, as opposed to the pattern of the bicycle or something like that, is that if someone takes it, then we now have a conflict because I want my bicycle back, right? And I don't have it anymore. There's no way for both of us to have it, right? I mean, there's a conflict there. You took it from me. I want my bicycle back. One of us is going to end up with it, or neither of us, right? And property rights help us to deal with that sort of situations, scarce, physical, tangible things. Intangible things, ideas and a melody and, so on and so forth, don't have that same property of scarcity. That is, I hear a Beatles melody and I remember it, and then I go and play it on the guitar, and then using my guitar, my mind, my body, and then I record me playing that Beatles melody on the guitar using my recording equipment, and then I upload it to my website, and someone comes along and says, you've hurt the Beatles. And I'm like, what did I do? I used my mind and my stuff, and I never touched any of their stuff. Right. So there's no scarcity in intangible goods like that. This is not a defect of these things. This is not something we should sort of artificially try to create scarcity when there isn't. It's a good thing, right? It's a blessing that we can learn from each other. And in fact, this is how we advance as a civilization, right? It is learning. And what is learning? It's copying with modification, or just copying in some cases.
Right. Can I jump in here?
Yeah, please.
Copying is one aspect of it, I think. I think where copyright in this particular instance that Radler was talking about really comes into play is copying with a variation. So let's take that music example that Radlib was talking about. There are a lot of artists out there, independent artists out there, who will take a song and change it up in some way. They'll change up maybe the tone of the song or the instruments that are used to create the song, and it gives it a different feel. Now, if they put in the work to change that song, they use their own instruments or they use their own musical software to do that. I think that they've put their effort in, they've put their time in to do that. And so now I think that song has been altered enough to where they can say, well, it's a totally different thing under copyright, and you wouldn't be able to do that. Because obviously the original artist has the right to the song and the lyrics in that particular order and for that particular song in that particular way. And I think the other thing I want to add here is, Lambda, you mentioned before that people were saying that in the last stream, they thought you weren't offering an alternative. Well, Rothbard in the book actually offers a few alternatives, and maybe we can get onto this later on, Radlib, if you want to read some of the quotes. But there are contracts that you can set up. There are things that you can put onto material that basically says, if you buy this material, you don't have the rights to copy or distribute it yourself or reproduce it in any way. And by buying this material, you accept that, and that's a contract that you make between party A and party B. So there's other ways to ensure the integrity of the product for the company or the artist without introducing copyright or patents.
Who is hurt by this? In the patent case, you could say, well, it could lead to people dying, or it's basically artificially jacking up the price of an invention that was inevitable because, as we talked about, when a combination of different existing technologies are put together in such a way, its time has usually come. As you said, 20 people come up with the with the same invention at the same time. It was not the case, however, that 23 people came up with Paul McCartney's Yesterday at the same time. Only he did. I don't understand why Paul McCartney should not be remunerated for that, or or who you think is being hurt by the fact that he shouldn't be. Like what? Who?
Right. So I'll speak straight to that.
Who is harmed by this?
Right. So Matthias already anticipated me with the chat that Madmer popped up, but let me read from Kinsella. Let us recall that IP rights give to property creators partial rights of control, ownership over the tangible property of everyone else. That should start to make you feel nervous, AA. The pattern creator has partial ownership of others' property by virtue of his IP right because he can prohibit them from performing certain actions with their own property. Author X, for example, can prohibit a third party, Y, from inscribing a certain pattern of words on Y's own blank pages with Y's own ink. And the drawing or cartoon that I saw that really brought this home is someone is in a bookstore browsing around. He opens a sort of a smaller book, and he kind of gets engaged with it. And then he kind of loses track of time, then realizes he read the whole book. And he sort of sheepishly looks around, shelves the book, walks out past those sensors, and it beeps because, the book is in his head. And we can't have that, right? I mean, how can you enforce copyright if you can have a copy going around in people's brains? I mean, surely that feels wrong. That's a bad outcome if it beeps on our way out the store because we read the book and now the pattern of the book is in our mind, in our physical brain, right?
I don't understand this though, because there are thousands and thousands of words and, God knows how many musical notes. The number of combinations is near infinite. Okay. Combinations of words, combinations of musical notes with words, etc. Near infinite. So if somebody gets to some arrangement of those words or of those musical notes before anyone else, then what's wrong with the fact that they then have ownership of that for a certain period of time because they got there first? I mean, if you had come up with Yesterday, then you should have had it, but it was him. Right, I don't understand.
It isn't infringement of
write your own song, but you can just write your own song or write your own book, or even take the same ideas from my book and write them in slightly different words, which happens all the time.
If you write a very similar song or a very similar book, you may still fall foul of copyright. And in fact, there's lots of cases of people who have been successfully sued for infringing copyright, who've written something that sounds absolutely nothing similar.
I know famously Dr. Dre was sued for using like 2 seconds of Star Wars or something on one song. Like he used a 2-second snippet of Star Wars music in one of his songs, and he had to pay like millions of dollars for it. So yeah,
I brought this up just before when I said that artists usually try and take a work and vary it up a little bit. And then because they've put their own work into it, they've made music that sounds a little bit different, but they may use the same lyrics, for example. They can still be sued. They can still be taken to court over copyright infringement, even though it is their property and their musical ability that they have used to make variations to their song, which it now is. It's a violation of property rights.
Well, one of the questions I've got here is, in the absence of this copyright system, how would Adele or Paul McCartney or any other person who has done things that are incredibly popular with the public get their remuneration? Because the alternative system that I see is the world of poetry. In the world of poetry, everybody's a poet, right? I don't know if you've ever been to these. I mean, I can't stand it. I can't stand the world of poetry. I hate poets. I think they're all wankers. Sorry if any former colleagues listening, but sorry,
John D.
Right, but basically, in the world of poetry, everybody's a poet, and nobody reads anybody. Everybody just writes their own poem, and nobody reads any. Everybody's like, "Oh, I'll read yours if you read mine." We're like, "Oh, you know, there's no like." It's the opposite problem. It's the problem of absolute overabundance where everybody is a producer. And
well, can I give you a different example? So the fashion industry more or less has no copyrights.
Yeah.
So you would expect, based on your assumptions, that it would be impossible for somebody to sell a high value garment because other people could easily copy it. And in reality, there are lots of people copying high value garments, and yet the expensive fashion brands still own a gigantic share of the market. There is absolutely no copyright protection on clothes. So when
it's fair to say that the fashion industry is not dying.
Yeah,
it's doing just dandy.
But that's physical. But that's physical. That's a physical item, like selling.
No. He's talking about the pattern.
Design.
The pattern of the design is not copyrighted. So someone can literally go to the walkway thing, right, where they walk down and show the dress, and go and make a knockoff of it the next day.
You can,
and
buy,
they do, right?
Yeah, you can buy the article off the shelf, go to your factory, deconstruct it, build it yourself. The closest you can do.
In that world, everybody knows, well, this is a knockoff. If I just copied the Adele MP3 or whatever, burnt it to a CD, and then sold it with a new Adele, a different Adele cover, it's just the same album. It's not a knockoff. It's literally just the same. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's just the same product. And I just don't see why I should.
That the dress copier does a good job, and they don't go cheap on the materials, and it is literally just. Yeah,
they probably get I mean, look at Marks and Spencer's. They're the number one retailer of clothes in the UK, and most of their designs are straight up copies from more fashionable designers, and they're the most successful. So I mean,
Lambda, I would counter your fashion design argument in one way, and just saying that fashion really hasn't made anything good since about 1920. So
they're not poor. They're not poor. Let's put it that
many
way.
people would say the same about the music industry.
That's true.
But hold on a second. What you didn't counter my poet's point, which is because we're dealing with artists here.
Yeah.
No, but poetry has got the problem where that everybody is a producer, so there's excess supply and virtually no demand. Everybody is and if you took away the mechanism of being able to, I guess what I'm saying is that the mechanism of copyright is the thing that creates the scarce conditions for supply and demand. Otherwise, I'm imagining a nightmare world where you just have you ever watch X Factor, and there's just hundreds of just awful acts with Simon Cowell just kind of shaking his head. I just imagine the entire marketplace would just be dominated by.
I don't quite understand, why is poetry your example? Because copyright does apply to poetry.
Well, I'm just saying that it's within the world of poetry. I'm just imagining that is how things would play out if you took away the copyright. Every bloke in his guitar would suddenly be a singer type thing, and nobody. But basically, you'd have a situation where even the top poets aren't that famous, right? Even the poet laureate is not that rich or famous as a result of their poetry, and exists on a continuum with a bloke with his own poetry blog.
I actually think
money out of it.
The fact that the majority of people listening to music are listening to a very small number of artists is a natural phenomenon and is not artificially created.
How would you get that phenomenon in the absence of copyright? I don't understand what the mechanism is to put Adele or Paul McCartney or anyone else or Michael Jackson, you name whoever the artist is. How do they get to that status without the copyright?
Right. So this actually is a point that goes against intellectual property, I think, because the main problem you have, one problem we have when we come to this sort of thing is we think about the Adeles of the world not as they once were, but as they are now, having already become well known, right? But more interesting, perhaps, is to think about it from the point of view of someone who isn't well known, right? Someone who is just starting out, because economists tend to think about the marginal situation, right? The person who's what are the incentives that face the person who's the new starter, right? And what you find is that for the new artist, a musician or whatever, their main issue is that nobody knows about them and nobody cares. That's really their big problem. It's not that they lack copyright protection or whatever. They could have they could have tanks around their copyrights. It wouldn't matter because no one would want them, right? So what a intellectual IP-free regime encourages is, it presents the opportunity for your stuff to get out there in ways that maybe you didn't even plan for, right? Now, we know this to some degree from the viral video phenomenon or whatever, right? Things going viral. And that often is something where they didn't plan it. And in some cases, I think they literally have tried to enforce copyright, and this thing went viral, and somebody whose IP was in the viral thing doesn't want that, and they try to shut down the viral thing, but they can't because it's kind of out of control by then, right? So anyway, I'm sorry. There's one other point I wanted to come back to, which is you asked how can anybody, be remunerated. Well, this is interesting because I remember I have a very minor personal connection to the group called Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, and got to know that band a bit very early before anyone else knew about them. And I remember reading an article years later, and they talked about, the topic wasn't IP, but I was reading it with an IP lens, and they basically were explaining how they had learned to not rely on making money from the sale of digital goods. That is something like a CD. They said, we've learned pretty quickly that, anybody can copy the music around. And that music should really be, the recorded music should really be thought of as an advertisement for the things that aren't scarce. And that is and, band merchandise that we sell at the concerts, basically, right? People like to see live music. They hear a recording, they're like, wow, I love it. I'd love to see them live, right? And so they pay to see them live. And they, once they're there, they want to, buy a band t-shirt or whatever, or get something signed, right? And that is a model that is sustainable. So actually, I have sort of two major arguments against intellectual property in terms of artists that I would want artists to hear. Or people who create intellectual property or create so-called intellectual property. One is the principled objection that it is not compatible with physical property rights. It's in conflict with traditional physical property rights, and so it's incoherent. That's one. But the other is just practical. You do not want to make a career that depends on IP protecting you.
Yeah. Because
that is a bad plan, right? Piracy, so-called piracy, can just destroy that in a moment. What you want to do is you want to be like Bela Fleck. You want to be like Bob Dylan with his, what's it called? Never Ending Tour, AA? I'm not saying it right.
Yeah. Never Ending Tour.
The Never Ending Tour, yeah. His Never Ending Tour, right? The Grateful Dead, you might remember, before that whole thing fell apart, they were a top moneymaker for live performances. I mean, it wasn't just going to hear the music. It was a whole, whatever you think of that experience, they offered a whole experience, right? When you went to a Grateful Dead concert. That's the sort of thing that you want to do. You want to think as an artist, not about, hey, I'm going to have a hit song, and then I'm going to sit back and let the money roll in while I collect the copyright fees or whatever, right? You want to use that if you do get that moment of actually getting attention, that's the thing that's hard to get. You want to parlay that into something that's scarce. You want to get people in seats at concerts or something like that.
Are you imagining a model where all albums are given away for free?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. They're just those are advertisements for live performances. That's really the right way to think about recorded music, and the way it functions for many people who just never pay for music. Many people younger than me. I won't name any names, but it's all of them.
So you probably have a retort to that, but I have 4 points I wrote down. So if you want to do your retort first, and then I'll jump in with my 4 points.
No, you do your 4 points, and then I'll think of my retort.
Alrighty. Well, just to the copying point, to some extent, I'm not fully sold on the arguments that Radical Liberation and myself, and I think Lambda, are presenting. I think this is why I think I'm more in favor of, for example, trademark, to make sure that people know that the brand that they're getting and stuff like that. But that'll be another stream. Firstly, when it comes to copying stuff, just outright copying it and redistributing it, a lot of people have fail-safes to try and prevent people from just straight up copying, for example, code or something that's very valuable to a company. So if you try and copy it, if you try and make a replica of it, the system completely crashes and it's unusable. So there are ways and mechanisms to dissuade people from trying to copy pieces of information that are valuable to that product, and obviously the company selling that product. Second point I wanted to make was piracy. I have 2 points on piracy. Firstly, piracy happens all the time. Effectively online, if you look hard enough, you can find whatever you want, both good, bad, and ugly. So piracy basically has already negated any sort of copyright or any sort of patents, and you can find whatever you want online. Piracy can also be a very good thing when it comes to advertising, as Bradley was saying, and we actually have practical examples of this. So, for example, the creators of Game of Thrones, the TV show, not the book, they were very much in favor of people pirating the Game of Thrones show. The reason being is that because it got the show very popular in the beginning because people didn't want to pay for HBO. So this is they saw that as an advertising mechanism to then bring them into, as Radical Liberation was pointing out, the other side of the business, which actually makes a lot of the money, the merchandise. My final point is ease and value. So most people value the ease at which they can gain something versus how much they want to pay. Obviously, value is subjective, and for this, it's a different point for every individual. But the majority of people, if they have to go through a single source to get a single album from a single artist, would rather pirate it. But services such as Spotify make it very easy to get a range of artists for that same sort of fee. And so with services like Spotify, you see piracy go down because they offer a service that piracy may have given them, but it was a lot more work and it had a greater opportunity cost. So I think and with Spotify, artists obviously get their cut, they get their share of songs and all this sort of stuff. So I think innovation is the answer here, not copyright. Innovation and creating new services and new technologies to handle this new environment without copyright is the answer.
All right. Well, I mean, I have different views on all of this. I believe that people make these arguments because they are pirates themselves. That they like not paying for things, and they want to continue doing that. So they come up with all of these justifications for it. And I mean, I remember the old Wild West days of the internet where you could just go on torrent and you could get any film or any album you wanted, and it was amazing. You know, especially if you knew what you're looking for. You know, you could massively expand you know, your accessibility to things, and obviously anybody who grew up on the internet did these things, but fundamentally I don't think it was a positive piracy. I think it devalued entire back catalogs, because now all of a sudden you could have the entire back catalog at the click of a button without even paying for it. I mean, certainly among the people who were younger than me, I thought, well, their appreciation for art was that much impoverished because they didn't have to physically purchase it and physically spend time with it. I mean, I remember buying many albums where I'll give you an example, right? So an album, a difficult to get into album like The Velvet Underground and Nico. The difference between buying the CD, being stuck with the CD because it's the only one that you can buy that month, and persevering and basically forcing yourself to like, the Black Angels Death Song, versus downloading it on a torrent for free, giving it a whirl once on your on your iTunes or your Windows Media Player or on your MP3 player or wherever it is that you've got, and then discarding it. To me, there is a value created in purchasing the physical one-off object. And this workaround, the Spotify and the other things that you were talking about, you say that it's innovation, but in fact, all they've created there is the you'll own nothing and you'll be happy model, whereby now, rather than controlling your own record collection, you've got some SJW twat somewhere who's suddenly going to say, oh, actually, this your favorite album from 1972, you can't have that anymore because it's racially insensitive or something like that. And lo and behold, it's gone. Or, I mean, I can give you a very good example. I spent hours and hours putting together playlists of nursery rhymes for AAA, and my favorite version of Animal Fair simply disappeared one day because Amazon Music had decided not to distribute it anymore, and there it was, my wonderful nursery rhyme playlist destroyed. Whereas if I had to go and acquire all of those properly, like in the old days, that wouldn't have happened. So I do think that this is a narrative of progress that you're selling me here, which is not progress, but in fact, as with so many things in the world, the opposite of progress, a devolution and an impoverishment of the artistic world.
But streaming music is operating within a copyright system.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is that is a second best system because the first system was broken by disgusting pirates, essentially, and it was broken basically by a technology that the original copyright system had not been designed to protect, because everybody was thinking in terms of physical albums, and all of a sudden we were in the digital world. So maybe it was inevitable, maybe that's just the nature of the technology, but I'm saying that the original copyright system in the world of music worked, and it worked very well for a period of time, and now we've gone to a second best scenario whereby the music system doesn't actually produce anybody anymore.
The Spotify example that I used, I think you're actually conflating this. The Spotify example that I used is something that you opt into. The Klaus Schwab, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, is something that will be imposed upon you. I don't think it's a fair example. And you understand the company that you're dealing with. Well, I mean, Joe Rogan, for example, from his experiences, we all know that he has been throttled or censored to some degree. So we know the company that you're going to be dealing with when you deal with not an Amazon, a Spotify. So you can make that decision. It's a value judgment. If you don't want to deal with Amazon, you can go right back to pirating, or you can go right back to buying from another source and directly buying a physical copy. It's something that you can opt into. Whereas the you'll own nothing and you'll be happy is something you don't opt into. That's the difference. The only reason that the original kind of music market still exists and you can still buy CDs and so on is as a legacy. And I'm sure there will come a day where they no longer exist as physical media and everything is a streamed service.
In fact, I don't. I mean, you'd have to look at CD sales, but I imagine they are a tiny fraction of what they used to be.
And vinyl sales have been going back up, though. So
yeah, I was going to
there's
say
a
vinyl's back up.
Yeah, but
from where? I mean, you could say, well, it's double, but double 50 is 100, double 100 is 200. I mean, what are we talking about in real terms?
I'm not sure.
Back to the 60s levels?
There was an album that what's her name? I believe Lady Gaga released that was only on vinyl that went very successfully.
That's a very good example. That's a very good advert, isn't it, for physical media and original copyright? Is that not a good example of it? Or?
Not really, but
no. Okay.
I don't think that the logic you're using, any of your arguments that you've presented are very different from the arguments that are used to take down capitalism. So
go on. Because what I'm hearing is we should just have stuff for free because we're used to pirating because we grew up in we grew up in this time of the internet, and so give us our free stuff, damn it. That's all I'm hearing.
To be fair, that's not me, right? I didn't grow up in that era, and I spent a lot of time at a place called Vintage Vinyl. In fact, I wanted to mention about the vinyl is I went there, hadn't been there for some time, and I noticed that there was a lot more vinyl than there had been for years. And I asked about it, and they said, oh, yeah, people are buying vinyl again. So there were less of the store was CD and more was vinyl. Now, having said that, I did find a quick chart. I don't know if I'll bother sharing it, but, the heights of vinyl are like 1977 through 1982 or something. That's where you see it really high up there. And it goes down to almost nothing by 2005. And now it's popped back up in 2015. But it's 1/10 of the level it was in the 70s when that was the only way to buy music.
Oh, okay, but if you just stick with that vinyl market for a second, okay, so we don't get bogged down in the specifics of technology. If you removed copyright, what do you imagine would happen to that vinyl market that you're talking about right there?
I don't know. Good question. I mean, people want the quality of the vinyl market. The quality is what they're looking for there,
Red, chat, please.
The argument that because the current system exists, we can't possibly change to a different system, we need the specifics of how it should be set up, is a classic way that people defend the state's operation. Every time the government starts providing something, that everyone comes around, gathers around it and says, well, prior to the government providing this thing, it was impossible. And if you're going to suggest a different system, you need to back it up in triplicate and show us models of how it's going to definitely be better in every way.
But we can go back before earlier on we were talking about Bob Dylan, and I got into the 1930s Delta bluesmen, a lot of those guys. Okay, I'm talking about the likes of the Blind Lemon Jefferson and Blind Willie McTell and Skip James and all these guys, Son House. Most of those guys were around and operating in a period where things were a bit looser, it was a bit more Wild West, especially with the sorts of records that those guys were making. And most of them basically during the Great Depression drifted into obscurity, were never seen again. Whereas if they had been around just a few years later, they would have made an awful lot more money, and that probably wouldn't have happened to them. So from the artist's point of view, surely it's like better for them than to have the copyright than to not have the copyright. Even if it's not as good for, I don't know, a busker or something, but like, who cares about the busker? Anyway, carry on, Lambda. Okay.
Well, being a successful musician is not merely a matter of being good. It's also enormously a matter of luck, isn't it? So just because a couple of people happen to be winning through the current system doesn't mean that there aren't lots of people who are losing. There's a few people who end up on top, but not because they deserve it, I would argue. I think if you reran history, maybe Dylan wouldn't have been a success because he just happened to, not hit it with the right people initially, and then history would never have known his name.
But now we've moved to this very strange kind of almost like, it's this argument that anybody who's on top is just lucky now. It's not talent. It's just like there's actually secretly a Bob Dylan around every corner, and it's just like a quirk of. I mean, what is this? This is like literally what communists argue. Communists imagine that when you have the utopia, this is what their system's going to unlock. But it's just not true.
Okay.
We actually have a quote from the book about copyright and patents and IP on Marx and Adam Smith. So, Brad, do you have that quote there? Because we have mentioned Marx a few times.
What quote? Where?
Page 41.
Oh, I see. Sorry. Sorry, I was not ready for this.
While you're finding it, shall I? Yeah. I have one other argument I wanted to put forwards. So your argument that because Adele worked really hard, she deserves all the money that she gets is essentially the labor theory of value, is it not?
No. The argument is not that Adele worked hard. Okay, I could work really hard on an album, and nobody would want it, right? Because I can't sing. The argument is that Adele is in massive demand, and she has a supply of one. If it's protected by copyright, her supply is one, right? Many people want Adele, her supply is one. This is why her live gigs will sell, as Radlib was talking about, right? To go and see, this is why people go and see Adele, because she's the only one, right? And it's just the same principle applied to buying her records. And what I'm worried about is some pikey, let's face it, some weeb sitting in South Korea or something with a disk burner, or you don't even need that these days, with a some data farm or whatever, who's able to get that Adele product to market quicker.
Is your concern on the supply side or the demand side? Because I think you keep switching. Well, you're concerned about.
My issue here, okay, many people demand Adele album. Let's say that this is the product. If Adele is not protected as the producer of that product, she will invariably get ripped off, and the people who are remunerated for that are people who did not make the music. Do you understand what I'm saying? She sat down and recorded an album. It's not the work she put in. It's the fact that she is the producer, and many people want this album. And rather than her being remunerated, you're now getting some person who had absolutely nothing to do with the process whatsoever, who's effectively just stolen it, selling it and profiting instead.
Okay, so Go ahead.
You're right, Mad Merc, about the passage from Kinsella. Go ahead. I'm ready. I'm ready when you're ready. Go ahead.
Read it first, and then I'll make my point.
Okay. So Stefan Kinsella in Against Intellectual Property writes, by focusing on creation and labor, rather than on first occupancy of scarce resources as the touchstone of property rights, IP advocates are led to place undue stress on the importance of rewarding the labor of the creator, much as Adam Smith's flawed labor theory of value led to Marx's even more deeply flawed communist views on exploitation. Now, he goes on to talk about the Randian view, but should I stop there for now, Medmer?
Yeah, just stop there for now. I think I just wanted to point out with that quote that that labor doesn't, the amount of effort you put into a product doesn't entitle you to its reward. But I think Lambda made that point very clearly before. I was a little bit, you preempted me, man. You preempted me.
Right, and then Hoppe. Sorry, one more thing from Kinsella here. He points out Hoppe's excellent point, which is that one cannot have a property right in the value of one's property, but only in its physical integrity. So in both cases, we need to, sort of lose that property rights is sort of lazily thought about as being about, fairness or something like that, but it really isn't, right? It's about conflict reduction.
Correct. I want to pose a hypothetical to AA. With the technology that we have now, we can replicate someone's voice if we have enough time of them speaking. So, for example, quite hilariously and famously, there was the Jordan Peterson fakes, right? So they could replicate Jordan Peterson's voice and get him to say whatever they want. If we got to a stage where this technology could replicate a singer's voice, so let's take your example of Adele, and these people wrote an entirely new song, an entirely new, instrumental use. They entirely new lyrics, entirely new tone, very different. And all they did was use the software to recreate Adele's voice. Do you think they would be infringing upon something that Adele should rightfully have?
Yeah, because what they're doing is they're essentially piking off Adele's popularity and fame that she has built up. It's like there's a reason, right, why not any old studio can come up and just pike you off the Marvel franchise, right? Only one studio owns the rights to making Marvel movies. If we wanted to make a new Marvel movie using the same characters with their lore and their back history and so on, it would probably sell, right? Because Marvel's popular. Okay, whether I like it or you like it, it's popular out there. Okay, and I think it's only just and fair that the people who own the rights to that, or who are forked out for the rights of that, should. I mean, we could use George Lucas as an example, right? He owns he owned Star Wars and then he sold it to Disney. Now it's only just and proper that Disney, can, whether we like what they're doing with it or not like doing with it, the fact of the matter is you stick Star Wars on something and it's going to sell. And this example that you've come up with is the same. If I wrote a fanfic for Star Wars and made my own Star Wars movie, and it wasn't shut down, people would probably want to go and see it, right? But why should I benefit from the accumulated capital, cultural capital built up that other people have done?
Because it's your property that you would have put in, and if they restrict,
no, because I didn't invent Star Wars and I didn't invent Batman, and it's only correct that the property holders to those franchises or to those things should hold on to them. I don't like this idea that any old person can write their own Batman fanfic and get it published and therefore enjoy basically piking off the popularity of Batman. I don't see why they should.
How is an idea scarce if anyone can have that idea? How unless you create artificial scarcity through the use of IP, how is an idea scarce?
So in this case, the idea of Batman is not scarce because Batman is a massive cultural phenomenon, or Star Wars or Adele, you name what it is. Okay,
no, but put that to the side. Put the cultural phenomenon stuff to a side. I'm talking purely about the idea. I'm not talking about the branding. I'm talking about the cultural, being in the cultural ether. I'm talking purely about the idea. How is the idea of Batman scarce?
Well, because only one person came up with that idea. One publishing house, one comic book company has pushed those stories, and so on and so forth. Now, if you didn't have copyright laws, it would have been diffused, and it would have been in the realms of the disgusting expanded universe fanfic fan site, and nothing would be canon. There needs to be a canon. Otherwise, everything gets knockoff. I mean, we talked about this last time, Lambda, when I defended the trademark. You're going into that. I defended the Coca-Cola trademark against all the knockoff Coca-Colas that existed because it was their product. They came up with it. Now you have.
I'd actually argue that if George Lucas released, say copyright collapsed and George Lucas released his episodes 7, 8, and 9, that would be more canon than Disney's, even though Disney owned the copyright. They were the owners of the property by law. But for canon purposes, I actually think that the original creator still would fundamentally be the person who can explain how the story carries on.
But he's effectively sold his right to do that he's
according to the current broken system, technically Disney can now write the canon, but I don't think this, just saying this is the current system and therefore he has every right to sell the copyright doesn't mean that the system is right. It's a bit of a circular argument.
Okay, but so you want a system where George Lucas hangs on to it till death, essentially?
If George Lucas was known to have been the originator of Star Wars, which has realistically not been solely created by George Lucas, it was the ball was started rolling by George Lucas and helped along, but then a lot of other ingenious people helped make it through employment. So they worked for a fee and passed their ideas into canon, but lots of people have worked on the Star Wars idea in culture. People have done it for free. There's comedy and there's all kinds of extras added on, globbed onto what makes Star Wars what it is today. I don't think in the system where there was no copyright, nonetheless people would be interested in George Lucas as an individual because he had been such a critical person at the beginning of the process.
But if copyright had not protected George Lucas back in 1977, Star Wars was such a major smash hit back then and such a cultural icon and phenomena. Every studio, every single one would have made Star Wars that year. Without that, and Star Wars would have been dead in the water by 1978 because there would have been literally 200 Star Wars films.
So you don't think if there was 12 Star Wars films in 1978, but one of them was made by George Lucas, you don't think that would have had the slightest difference, that there wouldn't have been any more interest in that version?
What I'm saying is, what would have happened is that after all of the other studios had seen what a huge hit Star Wars was, all of the other studios in the next year or so, I mean, that actually happened, didn't it? That everybody made a Star Wars knockoff, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying. It already happens.
Yeah, but they made a Star Wars knockoff,
and Star Wars itself was the product of copying lots of other people.
Wait a second, because the iconography, the name Star Wars, those characters, the name Darth Vader, that lore was protected artificially, yes, by the law and by these intellectual property rights. They were protected, right? So that if another studio came out with Star Wars, or if another studio tried to use Luke Skywalker, they'd have to answer a hefty lawsuit from Lucasfilm or whatever, wouldn't they? That would have happened without doubt. And what I'm saying is that in itself protected that brand, that franchise, for good or for ill. I'm just saying that Star Wars, as the cultural phenomena that we know it, would have been so saturated in that initial few years of success through other people just making their own Star Wars effectively. I mean, I don't know how it would have worked. I mean, probably Harrison Ford would have made like 20 films. Like, everybody would be throwing money at, like, have $50 million Harrison Ford come and be an R. Like,
do you not think that a giant film making machine, say Warner Brothers or Universal, would have come to all the actors and said, well, look, you can tootle around doing 20 films this year, or you can just accept a giant paycheck from us. We've talked to George Lucas. We're going to get all the original actors in. We're going to spend lots of money on the special effects, and our film is going to be the one that everyone considers official. And then everyone else claiming to be doing Star Wars, but with different actors is...
Yeah, well, I mean, you say that, though. I mean, I'd have to check who the original distributor of Star Wars was. But in that sort of world...
Fox, and in this,
in this sort of world, though, there's always a bigger player in that market. There would have been someone with more money, some bigger producer. Or the other studios could have got together and be like, right, we'll make it 3 times bigger.
Money isn't everything.
These days they'd co-op big tech. Like, they'd be like, all right, well, Google and Amazon have both got together to make, like, treble the offer of George Lucas for Harrison Ford to come in their movie or whatever. And if there was no protection on the intellectual property, they'd just steal that, and they'd be the ones who make bank with it rather than the original creator. I just don't see like why you'd want that to happen. It seems like a bad outcome.
I'll jump in there, but go.
I really want to say something. I just don't know where to go with this, because I just fundamentally disagree that the purpose of what, in my view, should be very careful and wise and judicious use of force should be used for something like making life fair. This sounds like terrible to me, and absolutely not, shall we say, masculine and right wing.
But it's not like no. Can I just push back on this? Right, in my mind, you guys are the ones making the egalitarian argument, and I am the one arguing for exclusivity and hierarchy. There should be a hierarchy in the world of Star Wars in which the creator, George Lucas, is the kind of emperor, and until he deigns it to sell those rights on to somebody else, as he did, he remains the master of that. And in your world, everybody basically owns a piece of that pie, just like everybody, theoretically owns a piece of the state. Okay, and they can basically take that idea and do it and bastardize it and make it like common property.
This is begging the question. You're assuming that creation is the source of ownership. Kinsella argues that that's not the case. Ownership. The source of property rights, I should say. Property rights have to do with scarcity and first use of physical resources, right? And you're just sort of making up some source of property rights because it feels more fair or something, and then using that as a justification for why it should be or whatever. I just don't recognize this invention of intellectual property at all as something that is just or should be used to enforce.
I
challenge your assumption.
It is a scarcity issue because there's only the scarcity.
I challenge your assumption that because you created a pattern and then decided to share it, and if you keep it in your own mind, then that's your own mind. You should be protected, right? But you created some kind of pattern. You shared it. I heard it or read it or saw it or experienced it or whatever.
Yeah.
And then did something with my own property for it. And now you're going to come in and mess with me because of what? What's your justification?
Right. If these laws didn't exist, okay, what you said. Do you ever remember the little ice cream vans that would come across? And I always remember when I was a kid, there'd be some ice cream van with a very clearly hand-drawn, slightly kind of pedophile looking Mickey Mouse, because it's slightly wrong. You ever seen that, like slightly wrong Mickey Mouse on the side of a ice cream van? You ever seen that? And essentially that's what the world would look like, because every company would copy every other company, so that Mickey Mouse would be everybody's property all of a sudden. Everybody would be able to make a Big Mac. Everybody would be able to make a Star Wars movie. And it would just so quickly destroy any value in any of those things that people love. That in effect, you have to use force and artificial scarcity in the way that we're talking about to protect the thing that genuinely is scarce, which is the individual creator. Whether you call it Walt Disney, George Lucas, J.K. Rowling, whoever.
There's nothing stopping a creator from issuing their own certificate of authenticity. Yeah. And if people recognize the original creator as having a valuable insight into the original creation, and that they, it's crazy to me to imagine that Star Wars came out in 1977 and George Lucas would be unable to make any claim to authenticity in his next creation, would not be able to make any money off of having created it in the first place. The vision that you're making is like George Lucas creates,
because any toy company could just sell Luke Skywalker figures. Any film studio could just make their version of.
Well, imagine a world where like small children could draw pictures of Luke Skywalker and put them on the fridge. That would be outrageous. We should probably prevent them from doing that, shouldn't we?
But they're not selling and making a profit off that.
All of these knockoff Luke Skywalkers that little kids have drawn on the fridge is basically besmirching George Lucas's
people are
great
saying
creation.
it's good for consumers. It's not good for
Lambda.
consumers. It's not good for consumers. It would be absolutely devastating and awful for consumers. 9 Star Wars films is bad enough as it is.
Okay,
Can you imagine 900?
Sorry, you're arguing 2 different points here. We're not arguing about a marketing strategy or the volume of distribution of a product. We're arguing about property rights. What you're arguing right now is a marketing strategy from a company to release a whole bunch of content all at once within a short amount of time, like Marvel does, right? And oversaturate the market.
What I'm trying to explain is, hold on, Madmo. What I'm saying is, if you had a system where there was none of these intellectual property rights or trademarks or copyright, okay, if you didn't have any of those things, literally anyone could make a Star Wars movie with the signature John Williams theme, with the signature titles, literally cast Ian McDermott and James Earl Jones and Mark Hamill. Like, there would be no restrictions whatsoever on any Tom, Dick, and Harry bringing out their own line of Star Wars merch. And this, it strikes me, is a recipe for disaster. It would be bad. It would destroy all things that you love very, very quickly.
When it comes to the actors, obviously there are contracts that actors can have with companies for exclusivity. When it comes to the ideas of Star Wars, well, the ideas of Star Wars, if you look at the history of Star Wars and you read about what George Lucas was inspired by, he was inspired by previous works. He was inspired by the hero's narrative, which dates back to well before Star Wars or the turn of the century. It's a very old and widely used narrative structure. He was inspired by the Flash Gordon reels of the past. That intro where the words come down and scroll down. So the ideas that made Star Wars, do you think that they should be copyrighted and George Lucas should have to pay something for that? You don't get to own an idea. You can't copyright
something that's amorphous like that, but you can copyright the logo, the names, the all of those things that come under, the individual notes, the individual words, and so on. You can do that, and that's fine. All art to some extent is love and theft. To mention Bob Dylan, but you have to do something tangibly new within some sort of tradition, as all art does. Well, what I'm saying is, once you've done that and an idea takes off, it shouldn't be you wouldn't get innovation in this scenario that I'm talking about. You just get endless knockoffs of an idea that's popular, and with no restrictions on anybody making the
we need to go to Lambda slides, because he prepared some stuff that addresses this, like the timeline and so forth. So let's get through your slides real quick.
Sorry.
And then we'll come back to these topics. Okay. I need to share them. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll go quickly because I was quite enjoying the back and forth.
Yeah, I know, but I want to. You brought some context that is relevant.
Okay, so I'll quickly go through this timeline. So in antiquity, there was no such thing as copyright, and copying as a process itself was slow. You didn't need any specialized equipment to do it, but you didn't need copyright protection because there was no way to sort of mass produce copies. Then around the middle of the 15th century, the printing press was invented, and suddenly copying became this tangible process that people could do, but only that, in certain conditions. They had to have expensive equipment, the printing press. Not everybody had one in their house, and they could only produce identical copies. Doing slight variations was very expensive. So this is the context where copyright came up. This was the era of technology when copying was this process that sort of doesn't make sense anymore, because we're in a different technological era. But this was when we talked about the US Constitution. Only a couple of years after that was the first copyright law, which provided authors with 14 years, and then they could renew it for another 14 years. Although actually, rarely did people actually bother obtaining the copyright. And this wasn't the right of the author. This was the right of a publisher, because they were the ones doing the copying. So an author would work with a publisher, and that publisher would have the copyright, as literally the right to make copies of that work. 1909 was the first time that we're talking about US law here. So it was extended to 28 years plus. They could again renew it for a further 28 years. And this obviously was the context in which the copyright had just run out on some of the things that Disney used to create those early films. Things like, I assume the Brothers Grimm stuff was all way out of copyright by then. But I believe there was some stuff that Disney used that was just out of copyright at the time. But then Mickey Mouse was about to go out of copyright in the 70s. Or I think right at the early 80s would have been when that happened. So Disney lobbied quite hard and got copyright extended to be the life of the author plus 50 years, which would have, again, expired at the early 2000s, at which point they managed to get it extended again to be life plus 70. I forgot to modify
this. Is just a coincidence that it was extended. Nothing bad or any sort of lobbying were happening.
Now I don't.
Are you saying that the copyright law is changed exclusively by Mickey Mouse, Lambda?
Oh yeah, no, that's well known. That's well known. AA, that the copyright law in the U.S. They call it like the Disney extension or something. I mean, this is one of. I felt like you said something a little bit wrong about 1909.
Okay.
Because Walt Disney was 8 in 1909, so I doubt anything was being done because of his work.
Okay.
But I think you're right about the extension of 50 and 70. Yeah, that sounds right.
Can I just say, people in the chat saying AA makes one consequentialist utilitarian argument after another. It's like AA versus based Liz over and over again. When have I ever argued from a moral framework? I always argue from utilitarian grounds. Anyway, carry on.
Well, I do want to kind of just recap what I see as basically happening on the stream so far. And I don't know if other people would agree. I think it's useful to take stock. So Radlib has presented a principled opinion, and he's sort of sticking to it regardless of the consequences. And then there's been a lot of speculation about this imaginary world in which copyright doesn't exist, but nobody ultimately knows what would really happen in that case. But
that's not quite fair, because copyright is, as you pointed out, relatively new in history, and
true,
and yet we had culture and creation, and I mean, we didn't just come up with artists since copyright came along, right? We had all that, and then the copyright system was plonked on top of it. Really quite late in the history of man. So
yes.
Academic agents' lack of imagination.
Hold on. All of those poor guys in history ripped off. The Brothers Grimm ripped off from millions in royalties. Who else? Hans Christian Andersen. I mean, these guys should have been billionaires.
All of these people who you're naming, who somehow we've forgotten, and their names have been lost to history.
Yeah. Where would Plato be? Where would Aristotle be if no one had copied their works? If no one had written their works down after their deaths? Where would they be? We wouldn't know of them.
Okay.
The copying process has made them famous. The copying process has brought their works into the forefront, as it is the foundation of pretty much a lot of our beliefs, if not all of our beliefs.
I also think that the perception that if there was no such thing as copyright, all there would be was knockoffs, is a misunderstanding of the types of people who make knockoffs and the type of people who make art. Right? If you didn't have copyright, the people who make art wouldn't cease to exist. The people who are currently being granted copyright would still exist, and they'd still do high quality work. It's just that the ability for people to make terrible knockoffs would now be legal. But I think people would still be doing high quality work.
You guys aren't. I see all this talk in the chat and here about knockoffs. You don't understand. If you remove copyright, you're not talking about knockoffs. You're talking about the thing itself. Do you understand what I mean? It's not like a knockoff. Here's Coca-Cola. Here's Jim Jones's secret brew cola or whatever that looks eerily similar. I'm talking about literally a studio making a Star Wars film with all of the official quote unquote official Star Wars music, paraphernalia, title sequences, actors, even they could even get some of the same personnel. It's just the guy who came up with the idea is cut out of the picture, basically.
Well, again, I really don't care about being fair, and I don't know why I should. You haven't convinced me of that, but let's leave that aside for a moment. Let's bring trademark into this real quick. Kinsella's view of trademark is interesting. He says that he sees no he doesn't see a right in the trademark owner, as we put it now, to enforce that. He thinks that it is the consumer that would be the aggrieved party. That is, we do still, even Ancapistan or whatever, we still have the notion of fraud. And if you present to me that this is the next novel from Stephen King, and it's not in fact the next novel from Stephen King, it's the next novel from Joe Blow, you've defrauded me, and I can sue you or whatever, right? And so that makes sense. So just in terms of establishing authenticity, am I getting really the next Star Wars film, in whatever sense that would mean to me, and someone basically fakes me out and tricks me? Well, then it would be just to go after them and say, you did a false representation. So that doesn't address every concern you're bringing up, AA, but I think it addresses a piece of it, which is literally someone just trying to trick you and say, this is Star Wars Episode 5 from George Lucas. And then you find out George Lucas had nothing to do with it.
How would you know that? What difference would it make if there was no copyright law, if there was no laws protecting George Lucas? Literally everybody could have made Empire Strikes Back and called it Star Wars 2. Everybody could have done it. And now it's up to the audience.
That's what I was just trying to establish is that even with this view of that's against intellectual property in general, you could still go after someone for being fraudulent.
How?
Well, I'm saying that.
On what basis could you say that it was fraudulent? On what basis?
If they claimed that the film that they were showing had George Lucas's involvement and it hadn't,
well, they wouldn't, would they? They just say, this is Star Wars.
But do you not think consumers would have an interest?
Yeah, but haven't you noticed that people do? Not everybody, right? But people do smell a fake, right?
How would you?
And they will say,
know it was what does fake mean? What does fake mean in this context?
This isn't
good.
There's
you guys have established there's no such thing as property around these questions. So there is no fake. It's all fair game. Piracy ho. These are your arguments. So there is no such thing as fake when it comes to this world where there isn't protections around these things. It's all just fair. It's fair game. Let the best Star Wars sequel win. Of the 800 that would be made.
Well, sure. I don't know that that's a problem necessarily, though, because this is what you're describing is what I would call the process of culture, which is that somebody does some creative innovation of some sort, and other people are like, oh, that's cool. Now, in the world of rap, I think you recognize this, right? You have certain people who do something new in rap, and other rap artists pick up on it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you probably can come up with a gazillion examples. And Julian says we've already covered this with the fashion industry. Yeah, this process of learning from others and so-called copying and trying to do something similar, that is what we call the process of culture creation. That just is culture creation. That's what it is.
Yeah, but that can happen with that always happens though, whether it's 12-bar blues or rap or any other form.
Okay, now wait a second.
Right.
I was there in the early days of rap when they first started doing the samples.
Yeah,
and that absolutely got destroyed by this whole IP regime, right?
So
they were going crazy with those samples. It was really kind of fun and creative. And then everybody started asserting their copyrights or whatever. And it just absolutely destroyed it unless you were just already a well-established artist and you could pay everybody off or something, right? Sure. I mean, there's a whole burgeoning area of culture creation that got crushed by this regime, right?
Yeah, but you could make...
You know the history better than me.
Yeah, you could make arguments, though, depending on the song. I mean, I'll give you a very good example, right? MC Hammer's Can't Touch This, okay, is it flagrantly samples Super Freak by what's his name?
I had it memorized when I was young. I'll look it up. But yeah, I know who you mean. Rick James.
Rick. So okay, now let's be honest. The success of Can't Touch This wasn't down to MC Hammer's rapping. And it wasn't down really anything to anything else other than that riff that he took from that he took from Super Freak is damn catchy, right? And it's gonna be a chart hit no matter what, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing that that sort of practice was clamped down on in the rap world. It probably led to better stuff being made down the line. I would argue, because it was the constriction, the limitation then forced rap producers to be more creative. But I just want to make this distinction though between being inspired by something and making something similar to it, like George Lucas making something inspired by 1930s heroes, or like I mean, folk artists did this all the time. They would always quote each other and steal lines and steal even like they'd have things that sounded like each other, or I mean, a good example would be Hey Jude. Beatles come out, and then lo and behold, Rolling Stones bring out Ruby Tuesday, right? A really Hey Judy sounding song. These sorts of things will always happen no matter what. What I'm talking about is the prospect where, rather than the Rolling Stones coming out with Ruby Tuesday, they literally just come out with Hey Jude.
But why would they? Well, as creators, we already established, Lambda already stated that it is innate to their character that people want to create, and they want to create something new. So putting aside the people who want to just make a quick buck, riding off the coattails of something that's original, why would an artist want to create the exact?
Hold on a second. Hold on a second, though, Madler.
Don't interrupt.
We're dealing with Hollywood here. We're dealing with
no.
Stand aside, people who just want to make a quick buck. That's all of Hollywood.
We are talking about artistic people who want to create something that is inspirational to them. We're talking about humans who are innately artistic and creative. It is not simply about making a quick buck. There is subjective value here. I think you're immediately just putting it down to a simple monetary end and saying that's the only motivation. There are many motivations among many people who you and I will never know what their motivations are.
Those artists that you're talking about, who at the moment enjoy special protections, would be absolutely crushed by those quick buck makers even more than they are already.
I think it's the other way around. I think the quick buck makers will actually promote, just like piracy did with Game of Thrones, will actually be promoting those artists. And because those artists are the source of supply for those quick buck makers, people are going to very quickly realize who the real artist is. Right? Go back to the Game of Thrones example. They embraced piracy. They embraced this distribution. They didn't try to reject it.
Hold on.
It was one of the biggest shows in the world.
Yeah, they embraced it in a world where all of their other intellectual property was protected so that they could make mass buck. If they lived in a world where any old studio could come along, any old person could come along and record, make their own version of Game of Thrones, you'd get a situation where there were literally 6 versions of Game of Thrones made that year. Because once the idea blew up, guess what? There's no restrictions on doing that. J.R.R. Martin doesn't need to be paid because intellectual property is not a thing in your book. So
okay,
fuck the writer.
What's the problem with there being 6 different versions of varying quality of Game of Thrones?
Well, it would just very quickly destroy all ideas, even more than it's done already. Even more than it's done already, because instead of getting the knockoff, you literally just get the thing itself multiple times.
So there'd be 6 versions of Game of Thrones, one of them slightly superior to the version that we actually got, and then several terrible versions, I imagine.
Well, who knows? Who knows? But I mean,
but there's a reputational thing.
How would you know? Like,
reputational.
Imagine
if you don't pay the author, people are going to look very much down upon the people who are creating the show who don't pay the author. Right, so there's a reputational reason why you would get the author involved and say, "Oh, we're the one show, we're the one show that's actually keeping to the source material, or we're the one show that's got this unique aspect." You have to actually stand out from the market. You have to actually do something different and innovate. And when you do that, when you bring that stuff to market, you provide more services and products to the consumer.
Why would any of them pay the author? I mean, let's face it, in this world, J.R.R. Martin wouldn't have made any money from Game of Thrones in the first place, because guess what? Anybody could just copy his novel. Anybody could. So there's already 600 versions of Game of Thrones novel, the Song of Ice and Fire novels, have made lots and lots of people lots of money rather than him. And no studio would need to pay him, because guess what? It doesn't matter. Anybody can film it.
But they wouldn't be able to make the next one, because the product of Game of Thrones, no matter how many copies there are out there, the original being J.R.R. Martin's, the next one in the series comes from J.R.R. Martin.
What difference does it make? There's no concept of original or fake in this world, because guess what? As soon as the first one takes off, 1 million people can write the sequel. 1 million people can write Song of Ice and Fire 2. Okay, some people would say, "Oh, right, well, I want to stick with the same author." Another guy can say, "Well, actually, I just don't understand. Without these protections around these original creators, you have a market where literally anybody can cash in on any amount of success at all. I mean, who knows? It could lead to a system, right? An argument you guys could have made is, what's wrong with that? Maybe somebody else would have written a better Song of Ice and Fire 2. Or maybe in the world where there's 7 different versions of Game of Thrones, the competition would actually produce like superior show or something. But you guys haven't made that argument.
Not been a crap season 6 through 8.
Anyway, carry on.
Okay, well, it's George R.R. Martin for one thing.
Yes, sorry.
Could you walk through the slide you have up there, Lambda?
Yeah, George. Sorry.
Yeah.
George.
So I thought it was interesting to have a brief discussion on how does creativity actually work, and how do you measure the quality of a creative piece? And I think there's probably a lot of misconceptions that play in here. One of which is, if you've got lots of individually high quality elements, you can combine them and you'll always get a good quality outcome. And actually that's not true. The particular combination of elements is extremely important. So it could be that there's a particular artistic work which becomes incredibly popular because the certain arrangement of parts, it has intrinsic value, and therefore just saying that combination is now owned by somebody will cause people to arbitrarily create a different combination, and that different combination of parts, even though the parts might individually be of high quality, the combination doesn't contain the same properties that the combination did. Sorry, I don't feel I phrased that very well, but I think it's an interesting aspect of this. Another thing I wanted to mention was is there a place in this discussion for sort of auteur theory? You know, the concept that it's always a failure to try to create something of artistic merit by committee. You need an individual with who is at the helm, who makes all the decisions, who has the vision, and actually that maybe this is a distraction from the conversation, but the other things I had on the slide was that there's lots of reasons why being able to iterate is really important for the way that society works. So we need to, for convenience sake of thought, for if nothing else, but also for comfort. There's all kinds of reasons why being able to take something that's in the zeitgeist and work with it like the clay of your invention is really valuable. You can't just always start from a clean sheet. And I've kind of linked this to the idea of memes as well, where we see this that in, you know, when people are allowed to take something and do small iterations of it, it does actually improve quite quickly. So I guess that's the opposite of the auteur point in some ways. If you believe that it's possible to get to the highest quality product through lots of people making small changes iteratively, I'd also argue you'd get there quicker. So it doesn't, if you think that you need a strong guiding hand, then the absence of copyright doesn't prevent the auteur from still being significant in the creation process. But if the auteur doesn't matter, then actually the ability for people to iterate their ideas is strengthened by removing copyright. So either way, the copyright system isn't helping from the demand side. I think it's, to me, quite clear that regardless of whether it's fair for the creator, from the perspective of people consuming content, copyright isn't improving the situation.
Can I ask something about memes? And I don't know if anybody's got the answer to this, but is there an official meme canon?
No.
That gets established, or is it just kind of a fucking mess?
But it sounds like you want central planning of culture or something. Like,
yeah, and this is actually
are you able to let culture just kind of happen? Is that okay?
Well, yeah, well, you could let culture just happen, but not if any Tom, Dick, and Harry can literally just copy the next person. That, you see, you have to distinguish between the iterative change that you're talking about, which is evolutionary Lambda, right? Where, okay, you get something and somebody makes a small change, or somebody makes a small change, versus literal
creation that's come out of that process.
Wholesale copying, whereby as I'll keep on coming back to the Star Wars, in the situation where there's no copyright, everybody makes Star Wars 2 in 1978, 1979, you know, and who knows? Probably there'd be somebody who made a better Star Wars 2.
I think your Star Wars example is misleading because
why is it misleading? That's what would happen.
Well, you're complaining about people making literal copies, but your example is actually people iterating. Like you would say that Dylan taking the tradition of the Great American Songbook and making his own versions is great. So what's wrong with people looking at classic films like Star Wars and making a very similar style of movie?
No, the point is not very similar, though. The point is it would literally be called Star Wars.
Okay.
It would literally be called Star Wars. It would have the same music.
Yeah, but see, that's why I brought up the trademark issue. I'm wondering how far do you go before the consumer is in a position to say, look, you've defrauded me. I thought I was going to see
what basis?
George Lucas's next Star Wars thing.
On what law do you point to say you've been defrauded?
Well, if the consumer,
I'm talking about what the law should be. I'm not talking about what it is.
Yeah, imagine you're putting up adverts for your new, like Fox wants to draw people to watch their film Star Wars 2.
Yeah.
Okay, there's loads of people who've made a film called Star Wars 2. So they need to find some way to convince consumers that their one's the best. And you can't imagine any way that they could signal this to consumers in a way that would either be genuine and lead consumers to watch a really good film, or fraudulent because they're lying. Like, can you not imagine?
Okay, now you've got 10 studios, the 10 studios with the most money probably, saying, "Watch our Star Wars sequel. It's the real one."
Okay,
and then we come back to the Coca-Cola problem.
But what kind of things would a studio try to do to get that?
Ours is the real one. We've got Harrison Ford. Ours is the real one. We've got Mark Hamill. Ours is the real one. This one was written by George Lucas, right?
But we already addressed this. We already addressed this by saying there are mechanisms in place, there are fail-safes in place to establish that this is the authentic product, or to prevent copying. So, for example, with your Star Wars example, you have, and I know for a fact that they had this exclusivity contracts. So the actors couldn't work for other studios to create similar products of this nature, and that's a very common industry practice.
Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher were signed on for 3 movies, and Harrison Ford was signed on for 2.
Yeah,
which was one of the reasons they were thinking of writing him out in the 3rd one potentially.
But
right, there are mechanisms in place to prevent this copying and to keep the authenticity of the brand. But that's assuming you want centralized control. I think that you're getting hung up on this point of centralized control. There are many communities that keep a very authentic canon without having a totally centralized control. There are decentralized areas. So, for example, I'm not the greatest familiarity with it, but there are communities in the Warhammer 40k that are kind of spin-offs, but they keep a very tight law. They keep a very consistent law because you have, as you would point out, AA, people like the train spotters who are very much focused on this one detail aspect of their lives that is great interest to them, and they care about it a lot, and they want to keep it pure. There are people who are very much committed to that
now
brand.
With the removal of copyright, now you've replaced the keeper of the canon, from being like George Lucas or some centralized genius figure to being a committee of nerds, effectively.
Because George Lucas kept canon when he added midichlorians in episode 1. The fan.
He did. he did.
No, he did.
He did. He should step over fanboys. It is his creation, and therefore, until the moment he sold it to Disney, it was his creation.
I think your mistake is that when he sells it to Disney, that he actually gives Disney the right to make up what the canon is.
Just like if you watch Saving Mr. Banks, which is about the process. It's actually a very interesting film.
It's a great film
because it's about the very difficult.
It probably shouldn't have been allowed to be made because it was an iteration of some previous.
Well, it's a very interesting movie because as I'm a massive fan of Mary Poppins, as you know, whole scenes are lifted from Mary Poppins, like dialogue, everything. They're put into the mouths of different characters. It's very clever, very postmodern. But what's your name? Travers,
yes,
the whole film is about the difficulty. It's a film about intellectual property in a way, because Walt Disney is trying to buy the rights to film Mary Poppins, and Travers is very unwilling to give up those rights because she feels an ownership over the character. And the way Walt Disney is able to sell Travers in that movie is by saying, "Listen, I understand how you feel. I've got Mickey Mouse in my heart," type thing, and I wouldn't want to give him to someone who I didn't feel was in safe hands. I mean, God knows if he can see what's become of his company now, but that's a different question. But
of course, he did nothing wrong.
It's an interesting thing to consider, though, because clearly to Travers and clearly to Disney, as depicted in those movies, and probably to George Lucas too, the creators do feel a deeply felt sense of ownership over their creations, and so why shouldn't that be protected by,
would you stop children playing Star Wars games in the playgrounds because that's
no, because they're not selling
deviating from canon?
They're not selling that for profit. They're not entering that into public discourse. It remains in the private realm of children playing.
Should people be allowed to publish a film if they're not charging for it, claiming to be the next Star Wars film?
It's more difficult then, because how many people get to see that movie?
Let's say it's a YouTube video with no ads on it. So, for example, there's actually a parody 30-minute YouTube video about Star Wars related, and it was made by some Australian blokes, right? And it was on the news here. It was very funny. It was very ingenious little parody that they made, right? And they didn't charge for it. It's just on YouTube. You can watch it for free. There's no ads. Do you think that they should be in violation of copyright? Because there are themes and there are characters and there are elements of that are clearly inspired by Star Wars. Clearly, just taken. Do you think that they should be
I think satire and parody are typically covered by copyright, aren't they? They're
Why
like
should
you're
satire and parody be allowed?
Yeah.
Doesn't that
because
trample all over the creators?
It's comment, essentially.
Why should comment be trump the creators' spiritual ownership of their imaginary
because you're commenting on it. You're not trying to recreate it and profit from recreating it.
But what if I did sell it? What if I did put video ads on that 30-minute video?
Well, fine. I mean, look at the Mr. Plinkett videos. He's got ads, hasn't he? They're just reviews. They're just very creative reviews of Star Wars. That's fine. What's wrong with that?
I think you're okay with it because that's what the current system is.
No, it's not because it's the current system. It's because they're fundamentally not competing with Star Wars. They are, they're making there's a secondary market for Star Wars comment, I guess. Look at Mauler. He's a massive channel. So there is a market for that, but that's within the ecosystem created by, this massive franchise.
I think I watched the Mauler review of The Last Jedi instead of watching The Last Jedi in the cinema. If he hadn't made that review, I would have watched it.
So, but that's fine. I mean, that's fine though. That exists within the current system. I mean, that's great, isn't it?
Say that again. Sorry.
I said that. You see, that system can only be sustained because Mr. Plinkett and Mauler and you and everybody else knows the only one true Star Wars is the one made by Disney now. Whether we all hate it or we all love it, that's the one true Star Wars. And without the system that we have, nothing would protect that. And so that whole lovely ecosystem that you guys all love would wither away as well. Nobody would watch Mauler's 40-hour review of the 850-second edition of Star Wars because the franchise would have died in 1980.
Nerds only exist as a byproduct of the copyright system. That's the most radical claim I've ever heard.
I do. I genuinely like. Can you name, right? Because we've had radically free internet, right, for what, 20, 30 years, 40 years, give or take.
Yep.
Can you name a massive franchise that has arisen from open source on the scale of a Batman or a Superman or a Star Wars? Because let's face it,
Twilight.
It should exist, right?
Twilight.
Anybody can make a Twilight movie.
Twilight and
Twilight is not.
What was that other?
There's not an official.
No, hold on. I'm thinking of the other one that was a spin-off of Twilight that women go and see.
50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey. Thank you very much. That's just one off the top of my head.
50 Shades of Grey is based on a novel.
Why are you saying that's an example, Mark?
Because it started as fan fiction from Twilight.
It was originally
it was fan fiction from Twilight, and that turned into a multi-million-dollar brand.
So I believe it was originally published with the Twilight character names. So it was literally like just put up online and then.
So am I correct in thinking that anybody can make a Twilight movie? That that's not tied down to copyright? That the people didn't spend an awful lot of money to acquire the rights to film Twilight? That's just free for all, right? Is that right?
That wasn't your point.
It's not about effort. It's not about labor. You keep coming back to this point of labor. It's not about labor. It's about property rights.
You're kind of your question, AA, is: has anybody chosen not to take up the government's offer of monopoly on a thing that they could profit from. And I don't think anybody has. And
well, what do you mean?
humans,
I mean, there's the world of software, right, Lambda, where it's become essential to how
the Twilight Saga
functions.
Had an author. What do you want about? It had an author and everything.
No. That's not your point, Mad Merc. You weren't saying that Twilight is free of IP. You were saying that he asked for an example of something that came out of internet culture or whatever, and your example is 50 Shades of Grey, which was literally just Twilight fanfic.
Correct. It was Twilight fanfiction.
Also, the misconception is that the big franchises are owned by the creators, which is almost never the case. The money is all like the music example. Most of the money was made by the record labels for the sales of their CDs and records. Very little came to
remuneration for distribution.
So yeah, so we're not really protecting the artist in that case at all. The artists, as we've mentioned, make all their money through doing live tours anyway. So which in the situation where everybody was distributing Adele's music for free would surely only increase her notoriety and popularity. So I would imagine that the artists themselves would massively benefit from. So if you're thinking of the artist as an individual, but the current situation is massively in favor of big corporations who can effectively wield a little monopoly when they get given it.
My sense is that it would have the opposite effect of just destroying anybody's idea, period, because of the situation, because of what happens. We know what happens when something's popular. I mean, we talked a lot about films, but you can take it when something's popular, everybody does it, right? Because to make money, that's the law of the market. So if this is hot right now, everyone who wants to do that one thing.
No, not everyone. Not everyone. There is a market for counterculture as well.
Okay, well the same thing would happen there to a smaller extent. Because if nobody, what I'm saying is if there's no protection at all, it would just be like a kind of
why do we have Shakespeare, and why do people care so much about the original, like putting on productions with the original language? Why do we know about Homer? Why do we have, James Joyce? All of these works were written long before copyright existed.
Well, I mean, this is a even that has specific market forces behind it, though. Like, I mean, okay, we didn't have copyright, but just so happens that Shakespeare was a 10% shareholder in his own company, and that he was successful enough, right, that somebody decided to publish his works under his name after he died. So there are circumstances that went into kind of ensuring it was those people and not some.
But these circumstances have become impossible in the last 400 years.
Well, I mean, some of the technology has changed, though, isn't it? As you talk through yourself. So, I mean, I do think, for example, I would concede that the digitization of the world has led to a kind of crisis and dilemma for the traditional model of the music industry, and they're still working that out. I would say it's led to a worse situation because of the things we were talking about before, because of the you'll own nothing and be happy, the Spotify streaming culture. It leads to a very different type of engagement with the product. But, at least the market has found a way around it. But I mean, that's tangential, I guess, to copyright.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't it bother you, AA, that these, what I would view as technological blessings, being able to conveniently make copies of digital patterns, for example, and distribute them all over the world. Instead of this being like an opportunity, the IP mindset turns them into a threat and a curse. Like I said before, the big challenge for an up and coming artist is simply to be known. Well, now, as we've seen, and not everybody's able to turn it into anything, right? But suddenly your digital product can be all over the world, and you go from obscurity to, being invited to talk shows and, being given opportunities to do more of whatever it is you did, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, this doesn't seem like a bad world to be in for a culture creator, in my view, if you knew how to play it right,
I mean, I hate to be all pessimistic though, but it seems to me that it results in Filthy Frank and that guy who shits himself, who I discovered the other day. Can't believe I saw that. I mean, who are the big internet stars who are like great artists that have come out of this milieu? I'm not talking about people from, early 2000s. I'm talking about like last 5-10 years. Like who are the big acts to come out of this?
I was thinking, but the specific example that was coming to my mind was Gangnam Style by PSY. Did you say that's Psy?
But that's awful.
You may think it. Well,
but that's terrible.
It,
Sorry, you're trying to use, again, going back to an objective standard. Value is subjective, AA. I'm sorry, but you're sneaking this in the back door by saying it's terrible. This is awful.
Yes, it is.
I don't like it, but that's your standard.
What I'm saying is the aggregated,
wholesome, most base person within this community has said, "Oh, I like it." So
hold on,
it doesn't matter. It's subjective.
What I'm saying is, without the artificial entry barriers of having to pay, like, let's say £10 for a music album to gain access to some music. Instead, what you get is an awful aggregating effect where not only do you get the downwards pressure of the lowest common denominator that comes from the debased nature of man, but on top of that, it's for free as well. So hence you get Filthy Frank, Gangnam Style, fucking Crazy Frog, and all of these other awful things, and that's why we live in the ashes.
This is a really good point from Matthias. Filthy Frank has literally produced some of the most beautiful music in the past few years. His music artist name is Joji, I believe that's how you pronounce it.
Oh, what do you know?
So, Filthy Frank may be a big name, but he's also gone. Filthy Frank is no longer around. Crazy Frog might be something that was, when you were in your 20s or 30s, AA, but I don't even know what that is. So, it's not like these things stick around. They're here now, gone the next day. But
so this is what you're offering.
Stick around.
I asked for examples of great things that have been produced in this relatively IP free space. I got Gangnam Style and literally like Filthy Frank's alter ego. Like, this is what you're giving me.
I think the next unpopular opinion should be about this Joji character.
Yeah, there might be a stream sometime where we could look at some of Joji's older channel videos. I don't know. Maybe that's been done before.
Well, let's move toward wrapping up. I find that I'm at a little bit of a loss because I'm not really hearing any arguments from you, AA. It's just a lot of sentiment.
I've given you loads of arguments.
Let me finish. It's a lot of sentiment and lack of imagination, as far as I can tell. It's basically you have various opinions, and you are sort of used to the way things work, and you haven't really thought through. I was giving you really concrete examples of how, musical artists are able to turn the easily reproducible intellectual property into scarce things that they can make money off of, right?
But they do that already.
This is very practical, right? And this is in fact what they're having to do, regardless of our opinions about intellectual property. People have to figure out how to make money in other ways besides something that can be easily copied, because the internet is a giant copy machine. And like I said, viewing that as bad seems like you've taken a wrong turn, like heaven dropped something amazing on us and we're cursing it, you know.
It didn't.
Namely
It's terrible.
that we can easily copy information all over the world, you know, which could be used for good and sometimes is, and sometimes used for bad things. I follow, but it's not in and of itself, I think, an evil thing. It's kind of an amazing development.
It's led to an army of stupid little kids with anime cat avatars and horrible decentered culture which is endlessly self-referential, but in which everybody is so retarded that they don't even know what they're referencing. It
is also led to a theologian, an academic, a family man, and a kid from Australia talking about copyright law from an institute that has done great work to support freedom and promote it around the world, being the Mises Institute, which I would have never heard of without the internet. It can be used for good or evil. It's merely a tool.
Yeah. Anyway, I just don't know what to say, really, because I'm not hearing arguments, you know. It's just a series of you know, what your taste is or whatever, right? Which, you know, and I agree you have good taste, right? I mean, I was just praising your Bob Dylan streams. But I think that when we look before the era of copyright, it can open up our imagination to how an era post-copyright can look. And in fact, because of the practicalities, the way the internet works, we are in many ways in a post-copyright era. Practically, what do you say? There's de jure and de facto. We are in a de facto post-copyright era in many respects. It's only because we're able to point to, you know, the occasional, you know, occasional, you know, top artist who is able to reap benefits from music sales or whatever. My understanding is for normal artists who aren't, you know, Adele, Spotify money is not exactly going to pay the bills, you know. So it's not really much of a model for widespread culture creation, right? It might spread your music. It might help people access your music. That's great. But in terms of remuneration, I don't think that sort of thing is very interesting, you know. Lambda?
I was going to say, much of the great art of history has been created through patronage. So yeah. I actually imagine we would end up in a situation where that was favored again, because if an artist could, I mean, Patreon exists in some ways for this exact purpose, to enable people to fund the creation of art. And then if that art then entered into the public sphere, but the artist was then, you know, got the benefit of being funded to do further work, it seems like a much healthier position to be in as an artist than trying to create and then cling desperately onto the ongoing revenue from things that had been previously created. Why not throw your ideas out and let other people have at it? And I think your speculation about what the world would be like without this system, it is very, very similar to the types of speculations I've heard about other systems like healthcare systems, or how could we possibly do without?
No, it's not. My arguments were based on...
I agree, Lambda.
My arguments were based on basic economic laws. If something's popular, the market with the without any restrictions, okay, and that's what we're talking about here, the supply would rise to meet the demand, thereby diminishing the value in the thing itself. So I mean, I use Star Wars as my example. Demand was massive for Star Wars in 1977. When the market saw that, without any entry to barrier, every entrepreneur would then have an incentive to produce Star Wars 2, and you'd then get a massive oversupply of Star Wars sequels, draining the value in the thing itself, and you wouldn't be able to get the cultural phenomena of Star Wars lasting.
Why do they have trailers that start with "from the creator of," but like the supply that people are after is not generically something called Star Wars, is it?
Anyway, it's late.
Well, we don't have to completely theorize, because of course the fashion industry functions this way right now, and what the practical effect is that people have to be pretty nimble and continue to innovate. That's what we see in a market that does not have the copyright protection.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a massively successful industry, whether you like what they do or not.
the two issues of copyright and patents, I think they should be gotten rid of. But I think I said this at the start. I'm very sympathetic to the view of trademark, particularly because you need that system of identification, right? So you don't have these spin-offs coming and claiming that they're the real thing or that they're the real company. And I think that system of identification is really, really very much important to the market and for consumers to identify what brands are trusted and what brands are the real brands. That's why I'm a bit more skeptical on getting rid of trademark, but that's a whole other stream. I'd just like to read this one quote before we wrap up and get to super chats. This is from Jeff Boeke.
Jeff Bezos. Oh no.
No, he's the owner of HBO. Quote, and he's talking in the context here. He's talking about Game of Thrones. We've been dealing with this and piracy of Game of Thrones. Sorry, we've been dealing with this for 20, 30 years. People sharing subs, running wires down the back of the apartment buildings. Our experience is that it leads to more paying subs. I think you're right that Game of Thrones is the most pirated show in the world, and that's better than any Emmy. He views it as free advertisement, and that's the owner of HBO. That's the big company that's supposedly afraid of their brand being sold and distributed.
It's not. The issue is not how many consumers are leeching off it for free or whatever. The issue is the supply. So yes, he's speaking from that, fully in the knowledge that the system protects him from anybody else making Game of Thrones. So you're not really getting the... You've got to imagine a world where not just HBO, but Fox and bloody... Warner Brothers and any other massive studio could just make their own. Amazon, anybody with billions of dollars, right, could basically just make their own Game of Thrones with different actors, and who knows, they might do it better, they may do it worse, but the fact of the matter is you'd get 8 or 9 or 10 versions, and that would be the norm in this world. It would be the norm.
So why couldn't you get a non-compete agreement going?
But that was very common. Right? People mention the days of Shakespeare, right? People mention the days of Shakespeare. What people don't know is that, for example, Hamlet. Hamlet. Everybody knows Shakespeare because Shakespeare wrote it, but somebody else wrote Hamlet like 5-10 years before, and in fact, everybody had their own little version of Hamlet. And that's what happened in that. That was a genuinely, yes, there was censorship from the Lord Chamberlain and so on, but there wasn't like somebody saying, hold on. Hamlet, that's that dude's play, or anybody could bring out their own version of these things, and that's what happened. Everybody would have their own version, and that's what would happen in this space. The same thing. I mean, we've seen it in history.
But
so the crap fell away and the good stuff remained.
No. I mean, we talked about blues, right? If you look at 20s, 30s blues, what happened in that market is that everybody played everybody had a repertoire of standards. And everybody had their own version of it. Blind Willie McTell had a Delia, and Blind Lemon Jefferson had his own version of Delia, and and that's how that world worked. It's a very different kind of. It was much less auteurish and much more kind of. I guess this is a community of guys, and they all kind of do the same stuff. That's kind of how it worked. Only this guy, he plays with a 12 string, and this guy's got a croaky voice type thing, but basically they all had the same repertoire.
I'm influenced. You keep bringing up Star Wars, and I'm influenced by the fact that I'm aware of some of the Star Wars knockoffs. So here's one. This is Roger Corman's Battle Beyond the Stars from 1980. Needless to say, it did not bring down George Lucas's
this is
following
not,
Star Wars films,
because it's not called Star Wars. It's not called Star Wars. He had to make it a knockoff because intellectual property and copyright existed. Therefore, he had.
It sounds like you're just making an argument for trademark, which is something that Kinsella at least thinks there's an argument for, just in a slightly different variant from what we have now. That is, someone comes out with something that presents itself as the sequel to the movie that I was so excited about, the next Star Wars movie, and they're fooling me. It's not, and then I can sue them because they're defrauding me. You cheated me out of my ticket money. I thought I was going to see the next George Lucas Star Wars, and you just, stole the name and called it Star Wars 2, and it's not. That I have no problem with that.
I just don't see a world where that way of thinking doesn't lead to copyright.
Well, it's a good job that copyright existed in Shakespeare's day then, so that he could do his amazing work.
But I mean, who knows what he would he. Let's pretend he wasn't allowed to write Hamlet. Who knows what he would have written and said? He was a genius. Therefore, whatever he was going to write was going to be good, right? His version, just so happens his version of Hamlet was the best. But
that goes back to my argument that I actually think that the components that he was working with were fundamentally good. Like he came to a good final product because he had the freedom to take the best ideas that he came across. And if you put arbitrary roadblocks in his way, like saying, sorry, unfortunately, you will be sued if there's I don't know the ins and outs. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but when it came to original scripts, the writers did get paid. Shakespeare was a bit weird because he worked for a single company because he was a part owner, so everything he made got brought out by the Lord Chamberlain's men or the King's men because he was like an in-house writer, if you want to put it that way. But there were other writers at the time, like Christopher Marlowe. He was like a jobbing writer who'd go from company to company. Oh, here's a script I've written, and they'd be like, oh, we'll give you some money for that and we'll put it on. And then, so like Shakespeare's company, they put on Dr. Faustus and Tamburlaine and, various other ones that they paid Marlowe essentially for the rights for, and that's how playwrights made money in that. Sounds like a wonderful, thriving, creative environment to be in.
Yeah, but it was, but also the opportunity costs for copying in that day and age were, the entry barriers to that world were, half of the population couldn't write, for God's sake. I mean, so it was and paper was extremely expensive to the point where most of the original paperwork from that day and age is lost because they had to be recycled. Paper was so expensive, they had to continually recycle it. I mean, people talk about the printing press, but the fact of the matter is most people didn't have a printing press. They were just, writing by hand. Ink was expensive, all of these sorts of things. Now it's a click of a button, right? So,
Okay, well, let's hit some chats. I'm sure they'll spark further conversation. Over on Subscribestar tips, got one tip from Deus Light, funds for the IP war. Thank you. And then let's see what I can catch that I can still display on screen.
Very quick comment on the subject of IP war. Have you come across the idea of copy left?
That's Stallman, right? Is it Stallman?
Yeah, I feel the need to mention it. Yes,
Richard
it is.
Stallman. Yeah.
So if you publish something with a copy left license, then anybody who takes it's completely open to anybody to take your idea and use it. But whatever work you create also has to be published under a copy left license. So it's meant
to be like a viral kind of
it's an interesting way to fight back against
spread the anti-IP across. Okay, Sam 153 says very much enjoying the points of view. Thank you. Autumn Chan says most artists would be paid by commissions in the copyright-free system. Yeah, well, I mean, we can, as Lambda started to do, we can literally just look to the past and see how it was done. Patronage is one. I guess, what's the difference between a patron and a commission? I think they're pretty similar. Anyway, but the idea that you want this artist to make some work, and so you pay them to do it, either because you generally because you want that work to be in your home or something, or you want to donate it to the church and you want to have yourself in the background of it or something, right? That sort of thing. Lambda, did you have comments on past ways that art was funded?
Yeah, well, the other thing I wanted to mention was reputation. I mean, we all have our CVs ready to go, containing our prior work. If an artist was known to have created something good, they would be able to get better and better jobs in the future.
Right. In fact, one of the things that people may not realize if they haven't been in the market for this sort of thing, you might think that there's just tons of talented people out there, but in fact, especially when you start to get into a certain niche, I need this particular kind of graphic design work, I need this particular kind of painting, or some niche thing. You start hunting around, and in terms of getting the really good stuff, you end up with a handful of people who can fill that need. It's not like there's just a gazillion people out there who can make the oil painting that you want at the quality you want it at, unless you're willing to really sacrifice on quality.
And once you become the one person in the world, you can really charge a lot.
Right. Yeah, when people just feel like really there's no one like Dylan or whatever, there's really no one who can do this, which, sorry, I keep thinking about Dylan because I'm in the middle of listening to AA's excellent part 2 talking about Dylan. And the thing about Dylan, as AA pointed out, is that people who haven't really looked into it carefully and actually given a listen think that because Dylan's voice is sort of, an acquired taste, shall we say, that it's quite easy to take the songs that Dylan has written and make versions that are just better, because you can just take the good bits out of Dylan and just put a nicer voice on it, and maybe some more modern instrumentation or whatever. But I totally agree with AA on this. When you go around and you try to find really good versions of Dylan songs that someone else did, again and again, what was it you were saying, AA? The ones who just make it sound sappy?
Yeah. I mean, or just strip out. Yeah. I mean, there are
but it wasn't Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but you brought up somebody from sort of that earlier era that would do a Dylan song. With the Byrds, they do a Dylan song, and it just didn't have the bite that Dylan would give it, right? It just sounds schmaltzy in their hands. Similarly, I don't recommend this. Try to take a song by Sting and make a better version of it. I know one artist who's been able to do it, and she died young of cancer, tragically. And she only did it with one song. Okay,
Eva Cassidy.
Yeah, that's right. Eva Cassidy, you know who I'm talking about. Oh, it scrolled off, darn it. I had one more that I was going to be able to display. Okay, here's another one, and then I'll go through the ones that I can't display. Tom of Loxley says, must go, got some Adele CDs to burn. I'd feel bad, but she'll get more fans at her next concert, and I'm using time and resources. She and I are a team. All right, very good. Okay, so let me make sure I've got them all. Refresh on my super chats here on YouTube, and go through and make sure we hit all of them. Okay, so starting from the earliest one. Drongo says, Kinsella has great talks at PNF Society. That's Hans Hermann Hoppe's Property and Freedom Society. And yes, Kinsella is great friends with Hoppe. He was the one who, I think to this day, probably maintains hanshoppe.com, which is where you can find everything Hoppe, something that should be in your bookmarks for sure. So he has really worked to try to promote Hoppe's work and their friends. And of course, if you haven't seen the picture of Hoppe holding the helicopter, that was Kinsella's. Is he in the picture? Anyway, that was him having fun. No.
On that note, it's very interesting that the Mises Institute offers a lot of the books that many Austrians and Austrian adjacent people have written in PDF form for free on Mises.org.
Right, and a funny. Go ahead. There's a funny story about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they're losing anything, because the more people that embrace these ideas, the better, and the more people that understand economics, the better. So they understand this concept that, look, you don't need to charge for the books. You don't need to have this copyright on the books. As long as the ideas get out there, you win with promotion. You win with this advertising. You win with giving people this information.
And they are a nonprofit, and so they don't have to make money at it in that way. Having said that, we beat a path to their door to go to their seminars and stuff, and there's always people getting turned down to be part of their seminars because they've made all this freely available. So the scarce resource, that is the seminars with the senior staff that I've been to, and I think AA has been to, those are in high demand, right? And if they wanted to make a buck off of them, they certainly could. Okay.
Do you know what's funny, man?
I want to share a story about Rothbard versus Friedman. Go ahead.
Just want to make. Well, speaking of Milton Friedman and the Mises Institute, it was funny because if you go to the Rothbard graduate seminar, as I did, obviously they lay on free lunch every day. So when I arrived, I said that I thought there was no such thing as a free lunch. I'm getting free lunch every day. I thought that was quite a good economics joke. But there we go.
Yeah. So also speaking of Friedman, so somebody was complaining that Friedman's influence is waning and Rothbard's influence is growing. And you could talk about various reasons for that, since the two of them are now both passed. You could talk about many reasons for that. But one of them that a fan of Friedman was complaining is he says, well, Rothbard's stuff is all freely available at Mises.org. Mm-hmm. And Friedman's is still under, copyright protection, all that. And it's like, exactly. Anyway, okay. What else? Where were we? Okay. I lost my place somehow. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, I had to deal with a little puppy who had a bit of an accent.
Oh, no. Okay, so Coney, current year, says, have you seen Razor Fist's videos on intellectual property? He states the Wizard of Oz franchise was ruined by public domain, whereas Lord of the Rings managed to stay pure until recently. One comment I'll make real quick, I haven't seen that video. One comment I'll make real quick is that I've been contacted that there's some folks wanting to organize various creators together to sort of defend the Lord of the Rings from what they're about to do to it. And I'm going to try to contribute. I wrote an article on Tolkien and how they hated him from the beginning of the Lord of the Rings being published. And so I'm going to make a video of that as part of that effort. The holders of the IP are now going to absolutely ruin it, is my understanding. Wizard of Oz franchise. I do vaguely remember a story about that a lot of different Wizard of Oz books came out, but the author himself published a lot of books. So I got a little confused about what happened there. But I don't think that I'm going to learn much from Razor Fist about intellectual property, I'm sorry to say. But I might watch it. I might watch it based on learning more about Wizard of Oz, because that does interest me. Okay, Chris Primer says, Tom Cruise will star in our films for decades, even if he's nothing more than a digital facsimile. Yeah, that is an interesting development, I have to say. I'm kind of curious.
How old is he? How old is Tom Cruise? Because he's like 55.
Pretty old by now. He's perpetually young looking, but I think maybe eventually we'll see him.
He drinks the blood of young virgins to stay eternal.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, but...
Okay, Matthias says, the legal basis is the same as when you pee in a barrel and sell it as oil. It's fraud. Or okay, that's him explaining how we could have
property rights
trademark. Let's see, Sam15. Oh wait, I read that one. Okay, and I read that one. Okay, Drongo. I copied some of AA's top movie work. No iteration here, just straight up copied it unedited. I won't apologize. Boy, oh boy, am I rubbing my hands grifting out of AA's old artistic talents. Oh, is this the I think he might be referring to not you, but
Morcar, yeah.
Morcar, yeah.
Really?
Is,
lots of people making that confusion.
Movie production.
Yeah.
Right?
What those have only been out for 2 days. They're not old.
Maybe
I think he may be talking about my top 100 movies that I did ages ago. I mean, is there any coin to be made from my top 100 movies? I doubt it.
I don't know about that. Maybe he's talking about this other character. What's his name? Sneak? That other fellow who did those videos.
Oh,
that old artistic
little movies there. Yeah, the Sly Sneak.
That's a wild conspiracy theory that Sly Sneak is the same person as Morcar.
No. They were both friends of mine from back in school.
Okay.
Sly Sneak was a tragic story. Anyway, carry
on. Let's see.
Conspiracy theory.
Okay, I had a thought. I lost it. Okay, and then I read the Tom of Loxley. Okay, I think we're caught up. All right. So are you going to tell them, because I think it would be exciting, Lambda, but it's up to you. Are you going to tell them what part 3 is going to be about?
Yes. All right. Okay. So part 3, and everybody is obligated to join. If you're watching this, consider it your mortal duty to come and join for part 3, which will be on my channel, Lambda Bible Studies, and we're looking at a chapter of Revelation from the Bible, and not just any chapter. We're looking at the chapter that contains the mark of the beast.
666. And I'm excited about this because the mark of the beast has been coming to mind constantly for me personally in the last few years, maybe especially starting in 2020, because what it specifically says is that you would not be able to buy or sell unless you receive whatever this thing is, this mark that shows that you are in submission to the regime, the ruling authority, and that this would be used to persecute like Christians, I think, right? And whoever else that the regime doesn't like. So this idea that we would have, let's say, a passport, let's imagine, that allows us to travel and allows us to buy and sell. Suddenly, this doesn't seem like such a wacky idea. Like, it seems like if they keep on being able to pull off stuff like the lockdowns of last year, they could do this in a few years, essentially. Have something that restricts us from buying and selling. And of course, you would very quickly lose it because, you're a white supremacist or what, right? Whatever the thing of the target of the day is, you'd lose your ability, you'd lose your mark or something, or it'd be taken out of it'd be marked in the system as, this guy, the serial number on this guy's forehead or whatever doesn't work anymore, So anyway, It seems extremely relevant.
It turns out that Revelations was written by a time traveling Alex Jones.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
The mark of the beast. You won't be able to buy anything.
Right. Somehow Jones became John.
Are you fellows
switching to Greek.
Suggesting that Satan would be for copyright law?
I didn't want to go that low.
You have to come and watch the stream to find out. But yes, the original title of the 3 streams was Freedom of the Market. And so I was kind of thinking that's the link, is that I think that these are 3 examples of the market being restricted for the worse in various ways. But interesting to talk about them all in a back to back. Not that they're necessarily the same thing or whatever, but
I'm sharing the article 9 infamous Star Wars ripoffs in the chat. I think you would find it very fun to look through there. At least one thing is something I fondly remember, though, to be fair, it was a Star Wars ripoff. And then, so I wanted to talk about Subscribestar. I mentioned at the beginning and didn't really make a pitch, which is that one of our supporters wanted to support us more, and he encouraged me to finally do some tiers above $5 a month. And he immediately jumped on the highest tier I created. And I was like, I'm sorry, should I have made a higher one? He said, no, I'm good. But anyway, they're very boringly named tiers right now, literally $10 tier, $15 tier, But a great suggestion was made, Mad Merc. I'm not sure I got to share this with you. That same fellow who encouraged me to add the tiers, and I finally did it, he said I should play off the Moon King thing and have the tiers be named after, a certain mountain on the moon or a certain crater on the moon. And then eventually at the highest levels, you get to, Duke of the Moon or something like that, right? And then I guess I'll reserve one for my wife, the moon's consort level or something, the Moon King's consort. Yeah, subversive. Yeah. Anyway, so what I mean to say about that is that that is a great way to support us. It's in some ways the best way to support us, though we also have the merch store, other things you can see in the a Bitcoin public wallet that you can see in our show description. And why would you support us? Because we're spending money. Woohoo!
Yeah,
we are spending money on the show. In between seeing us each week, Madmerker and I are quite busy with someone who I shall call the producer, and someone else who's doing some graphic design work, and then we're pulling over somebody else too. If you see some recent thumbnails, you'll see some of the fruits of this, but there is so much more to come. And if we hit, well, I don't want to say a particular date because we're working very hard and I don't know that we'll make it, but let's just say that these, you're going to see this all drop almost all at once coming up very, very soon. And the channel's going to have a pretty spiffy new look. And I think it's going to make the whole thing much more enjoyable, along with, being more organized in general, which we're also working on.
Are you worried that somebody is going to start a channel called Radical Liberation?
And knock me off. Yeah. I'll have to start by saying I am the genuine Radical Liberation. Don't accept any substitute. Right. No, I try to be the best Radical Liberation there is, Lambda, and that's my best protection, I think. So,
I look, just on this front, Bradley did a great job showing it, but guys, this is something that we've been working on really hard for a really long time. We've had a lot of help doing this. We're going to be expanding the community. We're going to be joining new communities, so look out for that one as well. But this is something that's been coming for a long time, something we've been planning, something we've been working towards, something we want to bring to you guys. We want to bring value to you. We want to bring something that's worth watching, worth listening to, worth products being promoted to you that are worth your time. So we want to really upgrade this show, and I think with the amount of money that we're going to be spending on this, we are getting a very, very good result.
Yes.
So just wait out for a little bit. We are going to be upgrading this show like you have never seen. And it is going to be, well, we're hoping that's going to be one of the premier economics-focused podcasts in the world.
Is this all fixed capital investment from you guys, or is it ongoing?
Primarily, it's one time. Primarily, it's a one-off to get some branding work done, some art, intro video, stuff like this.
Fantastic.
And then there'll be, I think, relatively small ongoing costs. So, yeah, once you see the result, AA, you might want to do something like this yourself, and I'm sure we could hook you up. So. Okay, well, thanks to Academic Agent and to Lambda for coming on my channel. And as I said, there's a part 1 in the show description where we discussed more on patent that was on AA's channel. And then a part 3, we don't have a date on it yet, Lambda, right?
No, probably in a weekish.
Yeah, coming quite soon. We'll do part 3 on Lambda's channel on the Mark of the Beast. So I'm really looking forward to that because, like I said, it's really been on my mind like crazy. I mean, it's not like I first learned about Mark of the Beast recently. I mean, I read Revelation when I was a child, but boy, has it come to mind a lot more in the last year or two than it has for the 50 years before that. So yeah, that should be fun. Okay, thanks everybody. Did I miss any last minute chats? I don't think so. All right, thank you and good night.
Night, everyone.
Good night, gents.